All right. Welcome to the Dynasty Evaluation Show. This is John McGlynn. I am the host of the Dynasty Evaluation Show. We have a kind of unique show today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about an underachiever, an overachiever, and someone who to grab for the offseason who might have an opportunity due to injury or depth chart changes or anything else that might happen in the offseason for each one of these teams. So that being the case, let's go around the horn here. We got a familiar face here. JT, what's new, man?
Hey, good to be here. A little Thursday afternoon action, right? We gotta love it. So, finishing up the season here. Pumped to be here again, John. It's been a while, man. We've been busy, been working. Haven't got a show for a while, so it's nice to be back.
Very good, very good. All right, let's go around. Jeff, you've been here before. What's going on?
Not much. Just relishing in a couple championships and in the real world with the NFL, rooting on the Detroit Lions. So everything's really good this new year.
Yeah, very good, very good. We got a new guy in town here, Funky Jenkins. Ian, what's going on? Tell me about yourself. What's going on with you?
Also fresh off some championships. I'm in 7 leagues, got to the finals in 4 of them, took down 3 championships and lost the 4th by about 1.5 points. A little bummed about that, but I'm also a huge Lions fan, lifelong Lions fan. I had Gibbs on all 4 of those teams. So pretty excited for him and his future. I got a lot of shares of Gibbs in Dynasty. This is my first podcast appearance. I'm just here for love of the game, love to talk shop, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's funny because neighbor across the street from me, Joe Castman, he's been in leagues with me since probably 2008 or something like that. He's never won a championship before. So in one league, he was down by like 111 points going into Monday Night Football, and he had like all these Lions on there. That long Jahmyr Gibbs touchdown won him the championship. He finally got a ring. He finally got the money. He finally got everything across the board. So congratulations, Joe Castleman, on a job well done. It's sweeter, I guess. The longer you wait, the sweeter things are. That's what they say, I guess. But it is what it is. Congratulations, Joe. Rings in the mail. I already ordered it yesterday. So I had to order 12 rings this year. Whoever wins my in-home dynasty leagues, I send them. I make custom rings from Etsy. And I put all the record, the league they're in, that kind of stuff on there. And it comes out of my own pocket. It's not part of league dues and nothing like that. It's just something I like to do for my league mates. So I won a couple championships. The biggest thing is I made money this year. I paid all my league entry fees off and I made a couple bucks. So that's what it's all about. Just if I start losing money, the wife will probably say, hey, you're not playing anymore. You're going to start cleaning the house, So I got to start making money. That's what it's all about. I got to keep making money. That's what it's all about. But here we are, talking about fantasy football. And I am going to timestamp this show just so that Jorge has record for the it's what we're doing here. So what I have is, let's start with the Bears. JT Orange, Mr. Justin Taylor, you're going to start the show off here. We are going to say the Bears. What is going on here? Who overachieved, who underachieved, and who's the off-season riser that next year you want to have in your fantasy football team?
Yeah, I know a lot of people are going to talk about Caleb Williams. Did he have a good year? Did he have a bad year? I don't have him on my list here. I think he was solid. I think the expectations were so high that people probably thought he was an underachiever. But if you want to go back to actual Bears quarterback standards, he had a really good year. So I think he could actually go in all 3 of these categories. To tell you the truth, I think he actually slightly overachieved. I think some people thought he underachieved, and I think he's also a riser. But to not use Caleb Williams for all of them, I think DeAndre Swift was a little bit of an overachiever. I don't think people expected a lot out of him, and I think you got pretty decent for what you probably paid for if you traded for him in a league or got him. I think you got more than you probably expected out of him. So I think he was kind of the overachiever on this team. I think the underachiever was Cole Kmet. He was not good. He was not good this year. If you were in a tight end premium league and you were counting on him as your tight end 1, you were highly disappointed this year. I had him on a few teams and he absolutely murdered me in some situations. He just did not fit well with this team. I don't think he's a bad player. I think it just was a situational thing this year. Hopefully they figure out how to, get him back in the mix next year. And my riser is Roma Dunze. I think, he had a decent rookie year. He wasn't phenomenal for a guy that went as high as he went in the draft. Obviously, we knew he was going to have to work in with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and all those other guys. So we knew he wasn't going to see a million targets. I think he's a buy in the offseason. I think some people might be a little bit down on him just because he didn't have a huge year like some of the other rookies out there. But I think you're going to see him continue to rise up in the offseason. I think year number 2 is going to be a big year for him. Another year in the system, another year with Caleb Williams. So Adunze is my riser. So my overachiever's Swift, my underachiever's Komet, and my riser is Adunze for the Bears this year.
Yeah, Dunze had 101 targets, 54 catches this year. Respectable, for a rookie. It's not terrible, but yeah, I think people are expecting a lot of things out of him. I guess if I had one in this league who I crossed my fingers when Roschon Johnson got drafted by the Bears, I'm like, yes, this is going to be great. And for him to have 150 rushing yards on 55 attempts, he had 6 touchdowns, but man, I just expected Roschon to have this role in this team to be the early down back, the David Montgomery type of the Lions, kind of thing like that. I know he's hurt all the time. He's got concussion issues, but still, I expected him to be a little bit further at this point in time. So it is what it is. That's why they play the games, and hopefully, I hope the guy doesn't have concussion problems going forward. I hope this isn't the past next year, but this is the Bears have a lot of kind of questionable situations going on. So that's something we'll talk about in the future, but. All right, so next team is Jeff. You have the Cincinnati Bengals. Tell me about the 3 Cincinnati Bengals, the underachiever, overachiever, and their offseason riser for you.
Well, my overachiever is Chase Brown. With the additions of Moss and Herbert in the offseason, I didn't expect 1,350 scrimmage yards and 11 TDs in the 16 games he played. It also included a solid 4.3 yards per carry. I think he just missed 1,000 yards rushing, but he was also targeted 65 times. I just didn't expect that. So, that was very solid. I know JT didn't have any expectations for the Bengals, but, I certainly didn't expect Chase Brown to have that kind of year. My underachiever is Jermaine Burton. This has been ongoing all year. At the beginning of this season, I thought that he actually had an opportunity to step up into that number 3 role. He was out of favor most of the season, and his only real work came on special teams, and even that wasn't really all that special. My offseason riser is Andre Oshavis. He was 5th in targets, 4th in yards receiving, with Higgins potentially on the move. I think he's in line for wide receiver 2 in Cincy. It's going to be interesting to see what they do in the offseason, but I think there's a real potential there. So if he's out there, or if you have the opportunity to get him and stash him on your bench, I think there's a real possibility that he takes a step forward in 2025.
Yes, I'm when Eric All got hurt, it crushed me because I have Eric All in probably 15 leagues this year. I'm like, I drafted him everywhere thinking that he's going to be the future. And I know Gesicki's a good player and it's a transition year, but Eric All is someone I'm looking for in the future as far as that goes. Burton, I had a lot of questions about Burton in the offseason. I know he had a lot of problems in college. Me and JT, how many times have we had this conversation about Jermaine Burton being somebody that kind of avoid because of his attitude problems, or not being able to listen and be coached? How often do we say that?
We talked about it a ton. Like, he was a guy, like, you see the film and you watch some of the plays and you're like, dude, this guy's got everything you want. But then just like, you gotta, sometimes you gotta read the tea leaves, and when every team seems to not like him and every coach has a problem with him, you're like, is he a guy who's just, maybe a little immature, or is this like a serious issue? And I think you were starting to realize, I think it's just not just immaturity, it's a serious issue with him.
And it's wild how quickly they soured on him too. They were really excited to draft him. They're like, this is our guy. He's got everything we want. We can work with him. And then almost immediately it became apparent, like, no, this guy is not going to work in the NFL. So yeah,
when you schedule an entire game plan for somebody, he doesn't show up at a team meeting the day of the game plan. Then like you got problems going on. So it is what it is. But okay. So after that, we get the Buffalo Bills. I'm the biggest Josh Allen stan in the whole world. So make me happy here. Tell me about these Buffalo Bills.
So, I mean, Josh Allen, another great season. I don't think you can really call him an overachiever because everyone expected him to do this. I'm going to say my overachiever is James Cook. Last year, he was a really solid kind of fringe RB1, RB2. And, the problem is Josh Allen vultures a lot of those touchdowns. Well, this year, James Cook was not hurting on touchdowns. He went from 6 total touchdowns last year to 17 this year, and really paid off his ADP, and went from a low-end RB1 to a solid mid-range RB1. So I think if you drafted him, you were pretty happy with his season. My underachiever, of course, I think no one will disagree, is Dalton Kincaid. People had a lot of really high expectations for him. And this is the problem when you draft for unknown upside. It can really work out for you, but you got guys like George Kittle and other really solid, proven tight ends that were being drafted behind him because, he's Josh Allen's tight end. He's going to take a step forward. He's young. He's got a lot of upside, and it did not work out. If you drafted Dalton Kincaid, you were probably scrounging for waiver wire additions at tight end throughout the season. And my riser, I think you can make a case for Khalil Shakir or Keon Coleman. Shakir wasn't anything special, but he was a pretty consistent producer. If you're in a deep dynasty league where you have a bunch of flex spots, he's a pretty decent flex option most weeks. But I'm going to go with Keon Coleman. He didn't start off super strong, but we saw some flashes. You see sort of a taste of his upside. The problem here is that, this offense is so weird. It's Josh Allen, it's James Cook, and that's kind of it, right? For fantasy, you can't really predict where the targets are going. Josh Allen spreads the ball around. He rushes a lot. But Keon Coleman, I think, in his second year, he could take a step forward and he could be someone that rises.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking about, I think everybody had major expectations for Dalton Kincaid. His hands coming out of college, how good of a pass catcher he was. JT's man, Ray Davis, is someone who might see the ball a lot. Keon Coleman is somebody that I drafted Keon Coleman like in the second round in a couple drafts, and everybody's like, "Why would you pick him up? He's terrible. That guy, he's not gonna make it in the NFL." He's going to have the opportunity. He's going to get passes thrown to him. He's going to have, he's got 57 targets this year for 29 receptions. It's his rookie season. No, I think he did okay. He didn't do absolutely terrible. The Bills don't really funnel through one person. It's kind of spread the ball around a lot. It's not the Stephon Diggs show anymore, but there's a couple rises on this team. I like the Bills' opportunity. The Bills have a lot of talent on this team. And, I agree with all. It's kind of hard to pick a riser on this team because there's a lot of offensive talent that's kind of, I guess, underused or they had their certain weeks or certain game plans before. But I mean, right now, Josh Allen is just an absolute stud. So he's going to be on the overachiever probably every year until he gets hurt or something. So, okay, JT, Denver Broncos, a team that kind of surprised everybody this year.
Yeah, this was I honestly thought this team was going to be terrible. So they absolutely blew me away. I did not think this team was going to be good. I like Bo Nix in college, and I saw him at the combine, and I was like, I don't think he's a first-round pick. I don't like him at all. I literally passed over him in a multiple Superflex leagues where I literally bit me in the ass and I didn't take him. So pretty pissed about that. So he absolutely buried me. He had a great year. I think he was the overachiever, and the season he had, I don't know. Even if you liked him, I don't think you thought he was going to have as good of a year as he had as a rookie. He was phenomenal, and he just got better as the year went on. So Bo Nix, I think, was easily the overachiever for this team. Javonte Williams, there was questions about the backfield, what was going to happen there, what were they going to do. If you had Javonte Williams and you didn't move him before the season, you're pretty pissed about it now because you're stuck. There's nothing you can do with him. He's nothing. I mean, he was okay. He had some good games here and there, but you're not getting any value out of him moving forward. As the year went on, they continue to work more and more guys in. It was a mess. Riser for me. Courtland Sutton had a great year. So I think he had a fantastic year. If you were counting on him, you were pretty happy with what he did this season. I don't think he kind of falls under the riser because I think people kind of already knew kind of what he was. For me, the riser for them offseason, who you want to go after is Mims. They finally started using him at the end of the year. I couldn't believe when he was rookie year. I was just like, why are they not using this guy more? And he would make like a huge play here and there, and then he would never see the field. And you're like, what is going on? You're like, does Sean Payton just like absolutely hate his guts? Or what is the problem with Mims? We saw it at the end of the year. Guy's got talent. I think he is the guy that you're going to want to try to get this offseason because I think you saw the breakout coming. You know, he had a couple big games near the end of the year. I think he's going to be this offseason. I think they're going to figure out a way to work him in consistently, especially now Judy's gone. You got Sutton, you got Mims. I think Mims is the guy that I want a lot of. If I had a couple leagues, like if he got dropped by somebody, I was picking him up mid part of the year, end of the year. Not a lot of, I mean, obviously Dynasty, most people were holding him, but if somebody was completely fed up with him or was injury concerns and they had to pick up other people, I saw people dropping him. I was all over him. I think he's the guy. But I was absolutely 100% wrong on this team. I just flat out. I had Sutton and I thought everyone else would suck. I thought like he was the only guy you're going to be able to have worth anything in fantasy. And there was a lot of solid players in Bo Nix. I have him on one team and it was a team I took over. So I can't even take credit that I drafted him because I didn't even draft him. But yeah, shocking. It was a perfect example of a quarterback who fits with a coach just right. Like the system that Peyton wanted to run worked great for Nix. I think you put Nix somewhere else, I don't think he has this type of year, to be honest with you. I just think it kind of worked out, perfectly with them matching up, and you hate to say the comparison, it's not really fair, but you got little bit of, little flashes of Drew Brees in that system this year where he was just making the right calls, making the right plays, doing what he needed to do. And I was highly impressed with Bo Nix. He's going to be a guy that if you try to acquire is going to be very hard to acquire after this year.
I got rid of Sutton last year in the league, and I needed a quarterback bad. I traded away Marvin Mims and a late third next year to get Derek Carr. And everybody's like, that's bullshit, blah, blah. The second half of the year, Mims heated up and Derek Carr sat on the bench on the IR. It's like I'm getting the who's laughing now trades the entire offseason. I mean, I got lucky. Another situation where I got lucky in is I did trade Javonte Williams away, but I also traded away, and I had Williams in a lot of leagues. I held him through his injury. I held him through the good times and the bad times, and hopefully the good times. And the good times never came. I traded him away in a bunch of leagues, and I'm super happy. And I also traded away Josh Jacobs before the season started, and I said, man, that guy's used up. There's no way he's going to do what he did with the Raiders. And man, that kicked me in the ass big time. It was one of the ones I definitely didn't want to do, but a lot of good players on this team too. And who's laughing now? Because Sean Payton, he said I let everybody take the other guys. I knew who I wanted. I just can't believe that Troy Franklin never panned out, because that kind of like the Troy Franklin and the Bo Nix with kind of like the Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, which I think everybody's expecting that kind of combination coming from college together to getting the pros together. I think everybody kind of saw that or envisioned that anyway. It never really happened. So we'll see what happens here with this. I think
Denver Franklin team might be a decent offseason target as well with Mims. I just think he's one of those guys that, because he didn't necessarily hit right away, I think people are going to sour on him. And I think he's a guy you could get for a decent price that I still think has some upside.
I have him on teams. I'm keeping him. He's not someone I'm selling low anyway. Yeah, I guess he'd be considered a hold if he's on your team right now, not a sell high, not a sell low or a dump or nothing like that. So, Cheeto, good morning, gents. Good afternoon. I've already been out for breakfast with my daughter. I've cleaned the house a little bit, made some coffee, went to the bathroom a couple of times because of the coffee. So, it's a good morning so far.
John, I saw the picture of your breakfast. I have to tell you, I was insanely jealous. I'm so hungry. I was looking at that. I was like, oh, that looks so good. I was like, I want to eat it so bad. Totally jealous of you and your
$42 for steak.
It looked awesome, man.
I had a steak.
The steak looked good, man. It looked real good.
She had some kind of what is that stuff they make in the South, like grits, but a gumbo kind of thing. It was jalapenos, mushrooms, shrimp, and a bunch of other stuff, and like grits. Man, I'm like, that looks disgusting. I'm never gonna. Who the hell would order that? It was absolutely phenomenal. It's on a picture on my Twitter page if you guys get a chance to look at it. absolutely it was wonderful. She made a good choice on that one. I would have never, if I went to a restaurant 7,000 times, I would have never ordered it. She ordered it and I loved it. You know, it's one of those things that you got to keep your mind open when you go to these restaurants. So, okay. Jeff, we're on the Browns now.
Okay, for the Browns, my overachiever, believe it or not, is going to be Jerry Jeudy. Moving to Cleveland, you know, expected an uptick in production, but he had 1,200 plus yards, was propped up by Njoku's absence for a third of the season. So had Njoku been in there, my guess is you would have had a little bit less production. He only had 4 TDs, but that was also 21% of the team's total for receiving TDs. I mean, Cleveland just, you know, no offense there. Again, some may disagree with that, but he performed better than I expected. My underachiever is Jerome Ford. I thought Ford would actually flourish in the absence of Nick Chubb. Of course, it's hard to assess someone on a team so bad, but you know, I have a feeling that I wasn't the only one counting on Ford and left disappointed. It just wasn't the season I was expecting. I had him in a couple of my leagues in flex positions and was left hurting with his presence. And then finally, for off-season riser, I don't know, maybe the first beam on a new stadium outside of town. I don't really know who to go with here. So I was looking really deep and looked at Jamari Thrash, wide receiver. It could be Cedric Tillman, but I just don't see anybody on this team that I'm really going to go and target. If I have somebody on my roster, I may keep them there, but for the most part, there's nothing here that I'm seeking to add to my roster.
I've always been a Michael Woods fan. He's been hurt. He's one of those great athlete, good, great dude. But my offseason guy would be Cedric Tillman, just because wish casting, because I have him in all of my fantasy football leagues. Cedric Tillman is someone I wanted from the get go. He's someone I traded up for rookie drafts. He only had 50 targets for like 29 receptions this year, a couple touchdowns. Most of that was on one big week. So whatever. It's someone who I'm looking forward to next year. But the Browns have a lot of work to do. You are correct, sir. All right, so let's go to the Buccaneers. Ian, all you.
So, I mean, I think just about everybody on this offense was an overachiever this year. They were phenomenal. But I'm going to go with Baker Mayfield. Baker, we had high hopes for him after his rookie season, and then he kind of fell off a cliff, and he was left for dead in Dynasty, and had a really solid season last year, and then he just built on it this year. I forget what his finish was, but I mean, he was a top 5, top 6 QB in fantasy. So I think his future is bright in Tampa. My underachiever, I mean, like I said, the entire offense was very solid. But I'm going to go with Rachaad White. He was being looked at as, a solid RB1 in Dynasty last year, especially if you're in a PPR format. His passing role was pretty elite. But the emergence of Bucky Irving, we saw him really take a back seat. He's still a phenomenal pass catching running back, and I think he's still a good asset. But he didn't perform to where people were expecting this year. And the riser, I think you could definitely make a case for Jalen McMillan. He was kind of a league winner down the stretch, but I'm going to go with Bucky Irving. This is a guy who I drafted a lot of him, and when I couldn't draft him, I traded for him. I was a big believer in his talent, and it really paid off down the stretch here. And I think it's going to be hard to acquire him right now after his run in the fantasy playoffs. Before the playoffs, I was actually offered an early 25 first for Bucky Irving. I turned it down and won a championship with him. And, so I think if you can get him for maybe like the 105, 104, somewhere in there, I think if somebody's willing to sell him for that, I would definitely be buying him at that price. But he's special, man. He is just such a dynamic runner. He kind of reminds me of like a Barry Sanders light, just the way that he can stop on a dime and accelerate. And he's actually a pretty capable pass catcher, even with someone like Rachaad White in that offense. Bucky was producing in the passing game.
What if I told you I traded away Bucky Irving and a late first to get Jonathan Brooks the week before he got?
Oh, ouch!
Yeah. Oh,
John,
yeah.
I was actually going to bring that up because I remember you made that trade. Then I ended up doing like 2 weeks later, I had a guy go. I just barely missed the playoffs in the Fantasy and Frames league. I missed it. I lost to Jorge in the last week and got knocked out. I traded Bucky Irving, and we had one of our guys in the league going for the championship. He was like begging me for Bucky Irving, and I got a first, a second, and Jonathan Brooks for Bucky Irving. So I was like, I kind of pushed him. He's like, man, I'm probably overpaying here, but he's like, he was going for the title. So I still feel good about it, but it does hurt to move Bucky because I think he is going to be good. And I think he's so much better than Rashad White. So Bucky did everything I was hoping Sean Tucker would do this year. Bucky Irving did. So that was slightly disappointing as I had a ton of Sean Tucker. I was hoping he would actually be the guy. But Bucky, I tell you what, for a guy that absolutely looked terrible at the combine, Bucky, sometimes you just have to watch the tape. The guy knows how to play football. He's a good football player. He bombed at the combine, like finished like near the dead last in like every category. But like the guy knows how to play football. So I learned a lesson there because I liked Bucky a lot. I saw the combine and I was like, I think I'm out on him everywhere. And he dropped like 4 or 5 spots in my rankings. And I was like, oh, I should have stuck with what I knew about him and when I watched him play. So that was another one of those guys that I totally missed out on because of the combine.
I stayed away from him because of his size. The 5'10", 193, I think it was his, where he was measured at. I'm like, man, this guy's not going to last in the NFL at 193 pounds. He's going to be a scat back at best.
Well, and then he ran like a 5'4", 5'4", 40. Yeah. So you're like, okay, you're like, he's small and he's not super fast. You're like, what is he going to do? But the guy's just a good football player.
He runs big, right? Like he doesn't run like a small back. He's not afraid to take contact and to give some contact, and he'll just run through guys.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Godwin would have been the overachiever on this team with Baker Mayfield. I would have known which one to pick if Godwin stayed healthy. He was lighting the field on fire every week. He was great. And I tell you what, a lot of people drafted Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer because they weren't sure which guy was going to be the, elevate the stock. But Jalen McMillan for sure took over this offense. I mean, he's the offseason riser for sure for this team. He looked so good going down the stretch. So I agree 100% on that one. JT, Cardinals.
Yeah, so this one kind of this is a weird team because you're like, did they underachieve? Did they kind of play like everybody kind of thought they would play? I don't know what time this. Going back, this might be crazy. I was going back and looking at stats and see where Kyler Murray finished. To me, he was disappointing. I had him on a couple fantasy teams and he absolutely buried me this year. But then I went back and looked at his stats and he's like, he actually had a decent fantasy season, but it didn't seem like it. If you had him on your team, you're like, what is he doing? He's killing me. I went back and looked at it as far as Fantasy Pro scoring was concerned. He actually finished as QB 10. If you would have asked me where did Kyler Murray finish, and I just had to throw out a random guess, I would have never guessed that he would finish as QB 10. Now, I think some of that helped that some of these guys sat out the last week of the year. Yeah. And some injuries, he kind of pushed him up a little bit as he actually finished a little bit ahead of Patrick Mahomes in total points. But, man, it didn't feel like it. It felt like he was not good this year. If you watch the Cardinals games, he was missing open players all over the place. He was frustrating for me. So he was my underachiever for sure, even though his stats didn't necessarily look like that. He was not winning you weeks this year like he had in the past. My overachiever was James Conner. I moved him in a couple leagues. I was a big Trey Benson guy. I thought, okay, he'll have a solid year this year, but he's going to get moved on. He'll get injured. Well, no. Fantasy Pro scoring finishes RB 11, right behind Chase Brown and right ahead of Jonathan Taylor and Bucky Irving. So, I mean, if you'd have told me you'd get same amount of points from James Conner as you're going to get from Jonathan Taylor. Now, obviously, Jonathan Taylor missed a couple games, but I mean, 15.9 points per game, 253 points scored this year, number 11, over 1,000 yards again, 4.6 a carry, had 47 catches, 414 yards. I mean, I moved James Conner and it burned me in a couple leagues. Like I traded him before the season and the guys I traded him to were like, thank you. He saved my season. So So that one I ate crow on that one for sure. For my riser, and this one might seem kind of crazy as a riser, but I think I do think it's Trey Benson. I just ripped and Connor had a great year. Benson didn't really take over like a lot of people thought he would. He was my RB1 in last year's class. I liked him more than Jonathan Brooks. I still think he's got room to grow. I didn't think he would just come out and be awesome and take the job from Connor this year. Now they did sign him for 2 more years, so that does hurt the Benson stock a little bit. But to me, if you're going to acquire a guy, he's the guy to go acquire. I mean, Connor just got through a pretty healthy season. He's another year older. Benson didn't do much. You could probably get him cheaper, a lot cheaper than what you would have paid for him last year. So if you still believe in him, I still believe in Benson. He's the guy I'm going to go out. I have him in a ton of leagues already because I drafted him everywhere I could. But I think he's a guy that you might be able to get a little cheaper than you did last year. I still like the upside for him. He's still a young guy. I didn't expect him to have a big breakout rookie year. I thought it might be a year or two before he kind of hit. So I'm still on the Benson train.
Yeah, Benson was going from like the 108 to the 109 to like the 201, 202-ish kind of area. Now you could probably get him for like a late second, probably, maybe even, I'm not going to say an early third, but probably a mid-late second for him. So, yes, absolutely. Jeff, how about them Thunderbolt Chargers?
All right. For the LA Chargers, my overachiever is J.K. Dobbins. I mean, who would have thought that Dobbins would actually make it a full season? I know he had, I think he was out a couple games, I believe, but owners were happy early on, but his absence down the fantasy stretch was definitely problematic. I think if you look at some of his games, he really caused some problems for those who were counting on Dobbins for the playoffs. I have 0 shares of Dobbins and probably will not go after Dobbins. If I did have him, I would be trying to move him. Again, one season, I still am concerned about his injury history. It's really going to be interesting what they do in LA. My underachiever is Kamani Vidal. I had a couple different ways to go here. I was going to say Gus Edwards, but the hype on Vidal was so over the top that, there was no way he was going to be anything but an underachiever. The circumstance played a little bit of a part, the fact that Dobbins played 13 games, but he literally provided nothing for owners. And then my offseason riser, I had a couple ways to go here, but I went actually with Quentin Johnson, and that may be, as the number 2, but he was so doubted in his rookie season. I was a doubter, especially with the hype on McConkey, but Johnson improved in almost every receiving stat, almost doubling his yards per game, while snagging 8 tutties. And so I have to ask, especially with JT, because we've had this conversation before, is this just another example of us expecting too much from rookies? We were so down on Johnson his rookie season, but even with McConkey going off, Johnson rose, and I think he has opportunity to continue to grow in that offense.
He sure does. He's he's fitting in. He's being the when they're double covering some of the other players. He's finding the seams, and now, which was a thing that he wasn't doing before. He could never separate. He's more of a player that I think that he belongs in a different position. He's not really a go up, he's not a winner in like the jump ball contest, but he seems to be getting open a little bit more. Some of that, if you saw some of the Ian Harditz and them guys were all making fun of because there was some serious breakdown coverages in the beginning of the season where he was like wide open, got like a 40-yard touchdown, like 2 plays, and they're like, this guy's awesome. And everybody's kind of making fun of the situation because he didn't do anything, but you definitely saw progression towards the end of the season. So yeah, I agree with that one.
I think there's an interesting element there too with Jim Harbaugh as the coach, and Quentin Johnston went off against Michigan in a bowl game. So I think he's been on Harbaugh's radar since then. And despite his terrible rookie year, I think Harbaugh knew that he had this in him, and like maybe with a different coach, we would have seen the same result. But I think part of this sort of mini breakout is possibly linked to his history against Harbaugh.
Trying to make him look good on purpose.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, Ian, you're up with the Chiefs. Should be an easy one.
All right. Well, man, up until his injury, I think Rashee Rice was the guy, man. He was looking like an absolute league winner. Let's see here. So my overachiever is going to be Kareem Hunt. This is a guy that was on waiver wires, and even in deep dynasty leagues, I saw him on the waiver wires in a few, and it's not like he was a league winner or anything, but for half the season, he was a pretty solid contributor. If you needed an RB2 or a flex option, somebody you could just either scoop off the waiver wire or, buy for almost free and immediate fantasy production. I don't think anybody was expecting that from him. For underachiever, I think if you asked Kelsey managers if he was an underachiever, they would say, yeah, but he actually had a pretty solid season. He finished as the tight end 6 and half PPR. But he probably didn't. But I'm actually going to go with Patrick Mahomes, especially in dynasty formats. We started to see some pretty solid production from him towards the end, and the Patrick Mahomes of old. But he really didn't live up to his price tag. If you're in a Superflex Dynasty League, he's probably the 101, 102. And he just didn't live up to that. And he couldn't, he can't really, at least this year, he wasn't hitting any deep passes. He had Worthy open on several deep passes, and he just couldn't connect with them. I still think the future is bright for him. I think next year, with a healthy Rashee Rice, hopefully once he serves whatever suspension he's gonna have, and with Worthy's breakout, I think Patrick Mahomes is still going to be a very solid dynasty QB for many years to come. But this year, I think he was probably a little bit disappointing. For riser, I'm going to go with Worthy. From the very beginning, like in the first game, we saw they wanted to get him involved. He was more involved than Rice was last year. And then he had a sort of a downturn. People were wondering if he was going to be involved, but towards the end of the season, especially after the bye week, it became very clear that it was a priority to get the ball to Worthy in space, whether it's a little screen pass, whether it's a downfield shot, whether it's giving him some carries. Maybe Pacheco's injury helped him get some more carries, but Worthy down the stretch was very, very valuable.
Yeah, there's not a worse feeling in the world than when you trade a guy like Kareem Hunt away, or you just drop him off your roster because nobody else wants him. And then the next week he goes to the Chiefs and then he scores like 100,000 points for the rest of the season. You're like, I couldn't trade this guy away for a buck for a couple worms, 2 weeks ago. Nothing, not even a 5th round pick in 2027. And all of a sudden he goes to the Chiefs like a week after that. And I'm like, no, this is shit that happens to John McGlynn like every week, kind of thing. But we all been there. We all know what it's like, but it is what it is. Very good. JT, you got the Colts. Funny how that works, but here we go.
Funny how that works, right? I could go all over the place. I'll try to keep it short here. I have to tell you, and my overachiever is going to be Alec Pierce. I know you burned me in the Baby and Boomers League on that Trey McBride trade. I'm never going to live that one down. God,
not as much as I mean, like you said before, there's some weeks.
But Alec Pierce, yeah, but I had to bring it. Alec Pierce is my overachiever. I mean, if you had Alec Pierce in a deep league, he saved me in a couple leagues where I was playing him in like like in flex spots and stuff. I mean, he was kind of left for dead. People are like, yeah, Alec Pierce, nothing going to do with him. He's going to be bad. Only 37 catches this year, but 824 yards, 22.3 yards per catch in 7 touchdowns. 161.4 points on Fantasy Pros scoring, averaged double digits a game, over 10 points a game. Right in front of him, Michael Pittman, 10.4 to 10.1. Michael Pittman scored just 4.4 points more than Alec Pierce. So it's a double. It's like, man, Pierce played really well, but man, you're disappointed if you had Michael Pittman, because like the fact that they were basically equal this year, and again, because I'm a Colts fan, I had a million shares of both guys. I literally had weeks and I'm staring at it. I'm like, do I play Alec Pierce over Michael Pittman? Like, I would have never thought I'd be making that decision in fantasy, but I was there. And multiple weeks I did play Pierce over Pitt. Now there is, talk came out that Pittman basically was playing with like a fracture in his back all season. So that I think hurt him a little bit. So hopefully he has a bounce back here. But I think Alec Pierce showed that he's a capable player, and with all the craziness of the QB play there in Indy, I thought it was just a real nice bright spot for Pierce. People that gave up on him. I mean, as being basically the team's number 3 wide receiver, you got actually really nice production out of him. So he was my overachiever. My underachiever, I don't know how you can't have him as your. Now there's multiple guys that could have been the underachiever, but it's got to be Anthony Richardson. I mean, if you came into the season, you thought AR was going to be your wild card. He was going to be the guy that won you a league. He was going to break fantasy. You were taking him crazy early in a ton of drafts like I did, and it was just utter disappointment. Now, I will say, I think he does have room for improvement. I think he can get better. Watching every Colts game, he did get buried by just some really bad drops and some plays where he could have easily had much better stats. And if 1 or 2 plays went a different way, he would have looked a lot better. But just the whole thing with the tap out situation and getting replaced by Flacco and then Flacco coming back in, it was just a mess. I mean, if you would have realized at the beginning of the year that Joe Flacco and him were going to damn near be next to each other in fantasy points this year, you'd be like, what just happened in this world? But that's basically what it was. They were literally right next to each other in fantasy scoring for the season. I think I went back and looked at it. They were like 70 points difference. I mean, that's 16 points a game for Richardson, 13-3 for Flacco. 3 points a game difference. That's just brutal. So Anthony Richardson, if you took him early in leagues, he absolutely buried you this year. Dynasty, if you believe in him, now maybe is probably the buy time, because there's probably a lot of people who absolutely think he's terrible and he's never going to be a good quarterback. I see it on Twitter every day. People are just bashing him. So if you're one of those people you want to take a shot on, now is probably the buy time for Richardson. But man, it's tough because it was just a really, really bad year for him. My riser is Josh Downs. Downs kind of had an underrated rookie year. I don't think with the QB play that people really gave him credit for how well he played as a rookie. And then he came back and had a better season this year with, again, terrible QB play most of the year. And he kind of proved that even with bad quarterback play, he could be good and he could be a guy that is useful in fantasy. So I really liked Downs. If somebody doesn't believe in Richardson's, so they trying to trade away every Indy piece, you can. I mean, look at Josh Downs. He Fantasy Pro scoring, he was number 35 wide receiver, 13.1 points per game, 183 points. Missed a couple games for injury, but he had 72 catches for 803 yards and 5 touchdowns. And he had multiple plays where he got tackled on the 1 yard line on like diving catches that would have been touchdowns, but 72 catches for 800 yards with just pretty abysmal QB play most of the year. I'm in on Downs. If somebody's not in on the Colts or not in on the QB and they're worried about it, I'm buying Downs if I can.
I'm trying to get Downs everywhere I possibly can. But the funny thing is, you were talking about Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce had a minimum of like 40 catches less than Josh Downs or Michael Pittman, and he's got more yards and touchdowns than both of them.
I said it before the season, John, because I just harped on the Colt. I said he is gonna be the home run hitter. I was like, he's never gonna get you 8 to 10 catches a game, but I was like, he'll get you 2 or 3, and he's gonna get a 40 or 50 yarder in there and a touchdown, and you're gonna be like, oh, thank you, Alec Pierce, for winning me the week with 2 catches for 85 yards on a touchdown. And that's what he did. They didn't hit him a lot, but he when he did get the ball, it was usually pretty impactful.
Yeah, I think Downs is the best wide receiver on that team, but Pierce is like the best wide receiver for Anthony Richardson, because when you have a QB that's completing like 12 passes a game, you need that home run shot. And he seems to really like Pierce and have a good connection with him. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Downs is the guy to have, but like if you're, let's say you're in a best ball league, like Pierce is the guy.
Oh, Pierce is a great dude for best ball. Absolutely. Like I said, best ball. And I had a bunch of deep leagues, like 14 team leagues where we're starting like 12 players. And like Pierce was a guy you were putting in your lineup every week in those types of situations. So he did he get you a couple of weeks where if he didn't have a big catch? Yes. But like when he did get something, he usually counted for you. It was nice. So And again, are people going to be out on a lot of these Colts wide receivers in the offseason because of AR? I think so. So I think if you're willing to take the risk and go get some guys, I like taking my chances and go and get some of these guys. I think Pierce is by far the cheapest guy you can get. But I just love Downs. I just think, even when AR or Flacco, but whoever played, he was good. And that to me, that says it all for fantasy. You're going to be able to count on him no matter who's in the game.
Yeah. Jeff, you got the lucky straw here. You got the Cowboys, so I'll let you run with that. Okay.
My overachiever. Well, most laughed at the Cowboys for entering the season with Dowdle on the top of their depth chart. I did as well, and so he's my overachiever. Early on, all the laughs appeared legit when you look his first several weeks of the season, but save for a dismal Week 16 performance that probably hurt several playoff runs, anyone that had to count on Dowdle from the stretch down the stretch could not complain, even though he had a dismal 2 TDs. So again, was that a matter of circumstance with CeeDee Lamb out and not much on the offensive side for the passing game, perhaps, but Dowdle certainly impressed me, and I intentionally did not target him in any leagues that I had. My underachiever, Jake Ferguson, this one personally hurts me because I have him in several of my leagues. And, while he was third on the team in receiving, he did not live up to his tight end 1 ranking. It didn't help that he never found the end zone during the course of the season. And, like I said, he was touted as one of the, not just the top, a tight end 1, but one of the top 6 tight ends that people were discussing early on. And it's, that one was very painful. And then my off-season riser, I'm not sure I like anyone here. Schoonmaker, Turpin, maybe. I don't see any of these being super fantasy relevant next season. If you have them, maybe stashing them on a deep roster. I can't imagine Ferguson's going to have as dismal a season as he did this year, but Schoonmaker could dig into some of the share. I just don't see anybody on the Cowboys that I would want to touch.
I really wanted Ryan Flournoy to be a thing on this team. He's got such an athletic profile. When they signed Mingo, we kind of think maybe Mingo needed a change of scenery. Maybe something happens here with that. But I think everybody had the Jalen Tolbert. Like, now is finally his chance. He's going to make something happen. He has 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. But he just seemed like he just kind of piecemealed together a bunch of junk weeks, and that was kind of all it was. And he had some great opportunities and never really panned out. So just kind of a mush-mosh here. I think the whole offense just kind of underachieved, and it's minus CeeDee Lamb, and even CeeDee Lamb didn't do like CeeDee Lamb type stuff that we all expected. He, 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns is nothing to cry about. But I think even with that, I think it just wasn't enough kind of thing. So the whole offense kind of fell apart. Now, Jerry Jones said the Bears can't talk to the head coach, and it's like, come on, man, like something's got to change here. I don't know what this guy's thinking with his future vision or what's going on, but hey, whatever, man. It is what it is. Ian, you got the Miami Dolphins.
So for overachiever, I think it's obviously Jonnu Smith. This is a guy who I was actually in on Jonnu Smith many years ago. I was a little early on him. He would have some spike weeks here and there, but you couldn't really count on him as a fantasy producer every single week. And even this year, it was like, okay, he had some good games, and you're kind of not sure if you can trust him. And then it became pretty clear that this guy's a must-start tight end every single week. I think he finished as the tight end 5. So I got him in the 28th round of a Dynasty Superflex startup. And I had Laporta and a couple other tight ends. And before the season, I was like, I got too many tight ends. I don't need this many tight ends. I'm trying to trade Jonnu Smith away. I couldn't trade him away. Nobody wanted him. And then he ended up being, a flex option for me every week. Unfortunately, his, I don't know if you call it a breakout, but his monster season came at the expense of Tyreek and Waddle. So for underachiever, I think you can make a case for either of them, but I'm going to go with Waddle. after a really strong couple seasons, he just fell off a cliff this year. He was sort of an afterthought in the offense. Obviously, he was playing through injury, which is kind of a theme with him, right? It seems like every game he'll go out, he's questionable return, he'll come back out and he'll play through it, but he's just never been 100%. Maybe if Tyreek, who knows what Tyreek is going to do? He kind of keeps changing his mind about what he wants to do. But if he's gone, then I think Waddle could be a strong wide receiver next year, but he really disappointed this year. And for my riser, this is kind of strange because I think he was already pretty strongly valued, but I think it's Achane or Achane, however you say his name. He had less than 200 rushing attempts and only 5 rushing TDs, and he played on a dysfunctional offense for about half the season while Tua was out, and he still finished as a strong RB1. His upside is tremendous. We all know this. He's kind of, a high variance player, and he'll make you nervous whether you're playing against him or starting him because you don't know if he's going to give you 5 or 40. But I mean, I think a lot of people are valuing him as a top 5 dynasty running back. Obviously, he's going to be expensive. I guess if you wanted to buy somebody low with the possibility of rising, you got Wright. He showed some flashes too. I think Mostert probably isn't long for the NFL. He really fell off a cliff this year too. But yeah, I think Achane is he's unreal.
Yeah, Jalen Wright is somebody who I drafted in a bunch of drafts. Mid-second round, you had to kind of pay up to get Jalen Wright in a lot of rookie drafts this year because I think people saw the opportunity of maybe a bigger back coming in there and taking over some of Achane's work. Didn't really happen. I mean, Wright didn't really see the opportunities. He wasn't on the field that much. I mean, he only had 6 targets for 3 receptions for 8 yards. That's ridiculous. I thought he'd be a big part of this offense. So no, I'm not getting rid of Jalen Wright. I'm trying to acquire him now. Possibly, I guess, in a buy low would be the technical term for that. But him and Malik Washington are 2 players I'm going after on the Dolphins. Those are the 2 players that I'm kind of spotlighting for. The Dolphins have a lot of talent. I think they need to go some little bit more defense in the draft this upcoming year. So they're going to have to go with what they play the card the hand they're dealt. So I'm going to try and acquire Malik Washington, Jalen Wright wherever I can in this team. So Eagles, JT, fly Eagles fly.
Yeah, Waddle buried me in so many leagues. So yeah, my Tua Waddle connection absolutely crushed me in multiple leagues. Move on to the Eagles. It sounds kind of crazy. I mean, the overachiever has to be Saquon. I mean, just an unreal season. If you got him, you were just ecstatic because he had a monster year. Depending on what scoring system you went by, he was either RB1 or RB2. If you went by Fantasy Pros scoring full PPR, he finished just behind Jahmyr Gibbs for RB1, but since he sat the last week of the season, he technically averaged the most points per game at 22.2. 355 fantasy points out of him, 2,000 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. Even with Hurts stealing all those 1-yarders, he still was able to get you 13 touchdowns, and they got him the ball out of the backfield. 33 catches, 278 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Just a monster season for Saquon. So all the believers, everybody that thought he still had some juice left, they just had to get him on a decent team and out of New York. If you were one of those people, I traded for him in a ton of places, and I was super pumped about it. He carried me in multiple leagues, and just an unreal year for Saquon. So he's the overachiever there.
JT,
my underachiever.
JT, yep. Hold on one second. I'm in a league right now, which is I took over an orphan from a team that was probably the best fantasy football team I've ever seen in my entire life. I have no idea why someone would orphan this team. I won the league, and I didn't have to do anything besides trade for a running back. And I have 5 first-round draft picks coming up this year too. And I walked in the championship this year and won by like 50 points. Like, this team is the best. I'm not even going to read the team, but I traded for Barkley like in week 2 from a guy who didn't like his team. And like I said, it's the 112. So I traded away. I got Barkley. I traded away Zamir White, the 25 second, a 25 third, a 25 fourth, my 25 first, which is 112. All these are 112s, and then 25 second from another guy who I played a championship, and a 25 third from a guy that was also in the playoffs. So, I gave like a bag of marbles for fucking Saquon Barkley in this, and he's got 2,000 yards. It was, it put me over the top on a team that was already awesome, but I got to consolidate my draft picks first of all in my team. There's no better way to consolidate than trading like late second, late third picks for players. But then to get rid of like guys like Zamir White and stuff like that off my team, to get Barkley, to import Barkley, I thought it was one of the best trades I've ever made in my life. Like as far as this goes, I mean, 112 is kind of, as we all know, 112 is there's nothing good secure about the 101, let alone the 112, especially in this year's draft. But I mean, to get rid of a bunch of stuff like that for Saquon, I thought was absolutely it definitely put me over the top in the championship contention.
In one of my leagues, I was able to give up Rachaad White and Michael Pittman and a couple different picks. I don't recall what they were for Saquon Barkley, and got me to the championship game. Unfortunately, lost, but I don't know how. But that was definitely a value trade, even though, like you said, especially what we just discussed about Pittman and White, as we were going down the season, it felt really good.
Sorry to interrupt you there, JT. Go ahead. I had to talk about that awesome trade I made.
No, it's phenomenal. Like I said, I took him in a ton of spots. I'm mad that I should have won more championships. I had a couple leagues that I just bombed out in the semis, where I'm like, how did I not win this league where I had Saquon? It just killed me. But yeah, I think he was. I mean, if you had him, he led a ton of people to championships. Even if you thought he was going to have a good year, he blew you away expectation wise. So I think he had to be the overachiever. My underachiever is going to be Dallas Goedert. I mean, Goddard, he just can't stay healthy, and now it's the question of like, is this just going to be a theme every year for him? When he played, he was decent, but he finished in PPR, full PPR, no tight end premium. He finished 27th out of tight ends overall. In a bad tight end year, he finished 27th. Now, he averaged 10 points per game. So when he played, he was good. When he played, he was actually tied for 10th in points per game at 10.4 with Zach Ertz, who was an afterthought for most people. So the fact that he got outplayed by Ertz, now the fact that Ertz played 7 more games than him obviously makes a difference, but only 10 games out of Goddard. He's one of those guys. It's moving forward. You got to decide, like, can I count on him as my tight end one, especially in a tight end premium league or a start 2 tight end league? Like, you might have to get some help there. So Goddard, to me, a guy I have in a lot of leagues. I like him a lot, but the fact that he can't stay healthy and the fact that the Eagles don't throw the ball a ton is starting to cause, at least for me, is cause for concern about what he's going to be able to give you moving forward. My riser, I don't really have a riser on this team. I was like looking through I'm like, man, who is like a guy I'm like out there like actively trying to get, or who I think is going to be big, and I don't know if there's anyone there. If I had to just default, I would say maybe Devontae Smith. In the fact that maybe some people are out on him. He had an okay year. He was decent. He wasn't great. He didn't win you a lot of weeks. Like if you go back and look at the stats, he had an okay season. It was all right, but if you were expecting more out of him, if he was like in your top 2 or 3 wide receivers, like you were having to start him every week and not as a flex play, you're probably pretty disappointed in him and just where the Eagles are going throwing the ball. I mean, you didn't even get 3,000 yards for Jalen Hurts. I mean, that's tough. I mean, when you got AJ Brown on your team and then you got all these other guys and you're not even getting 3,000 yards from your quarterback passing. So if I'm trying to acquire someone, that's probably the guy I would go after, thinking that the cost isn't going to be crazy. Obviously, AJ Brown is still going to be super hard to get. You're gonna have to pay a ton to go get him. So if you're looking for that second option, maybe Devontae Smith is a guy I'd be looking at and thinking I can maybe get him for a reasonable price.
Dude, when they got Jahan Dotson on his team, didn't you think that he was going to be this awesome like third receiver on this team. Like he was going to.
I thought he would be a nice mix. I really did. I went and got him in a ton of leagues. He was dropped in a bunch of my leagues. I went and picked him up, thinking, "Oh, he's going to be sneaky." No, just nothing. Of course, he has a nice last game when no one else is playing. But but that's it. I've seen a lot of draft talk on whether people think that they need to go get another wide receiver in the draft, or whether they actually think Dotson can be that wide receiver 3, but they definitely need a little bit of help there. Fantasy wise, though, like I said, if your quarterback is rushing for 14 touchdowns and only throwing for 18 and not even getting 3,000 yards passing, it becomes very difficult to play these guys week to week and think that you're going to consistently get production.
Yes. Jeff, Atlanta Falcons.
Well, obviously, Bijan had a phenomenal season, and, Bijan owners were finally getting what they had hoped to get from him all along. But my overachiever is Ray McLeod. On his 5th team in 7 seasons, he had almost doubled his career receiving yards in 2024 and also had career highs in targets and receptions. Now, given the volatility in his stats, I doubt that he was in many starting lineups. But, I mean, if you had him and you were playing him in a deep lineup, or if you were playing in a league where you had, return yards or anything like that, Ray McLeod was certainly someone who nobody expected to perform the way that he did. My underachiever is Kirk Cousins. During week 5, Cousins owners were in heaven when he threw 500 plus yards, and I think it was 4 touchdowns. And I think he had 2 additional multiple TD games after that. But with 5 weeks, the last 5 weeks with only 1 TD and 9 interceptions, it cost him not only his starting job, but it likely cost many fantasy owners playoff bids. I know I had him in a couple of super flex leagues as my number 2. Trying to scramble around to get a second QB was tough, but he was definitely the underachiever. And then my offseason riser, of course, is Michael Penix. He showed enough during his 3 starts for Penix owners to get excited about 2025. I have him sitting on a couple taxi squads right now, so he's something I'll be looking, or he's a player that I'll be looking at next year to move up. And if I can make a move with someone, I'll try to do that as well.
Nice. Very good. Very good. What are we at now? This could be a funny team. It's going to be a hard one to figure out is the 49ers. Ian, there's a lot of good players on this team, and a lot of injuries came and went, so this could kind of be a tough one. Go ahead.
Yeah, man. Like there's got to be something going on with the turf in San Francisco, because it just seems every year that entire team gets injured. My overachiever, I'm going to go with George Kittle. We've always known that he's one of the best tight ends in the NFL, but he hasn't always been consistent for fantasy because number one, he's a good blocker, so they use him as a blocker. Number 2, they have such a dynamic offense that sometimes they just don't need to use him. So some weeks, you put in Kittle in previous years, and he'll give you not a goose egg, but maybe like single-digit points, and you're really disappointed with the capital that you spent on him. But this year, with the injuries to Ayuk and CMC, he really stepped up and he crushed. And like I said, it's wild that guys like Kincaid were going ahead of him. George Kittle is good at football, and people shouldn't forget it. My underperformer is going to be Debo. When Ayuk got hurt, I think a lot of people assumed Debo was really going to step up and crush for fantasy, and he just had a terrible season. He was dropping. I think he led the league in drops at one point. He just there was something off with Debo, and now we don't know where he's going to be next year. It's looking grim for Debo. And for the riser, I think you could make a case for Jennings, but a lot of his production just came on a few spike weeks. He was a solid contributor, but I'm going to go with Ricky Pearsall. He had a bit of a roller coaster season. He was drafted pretty highly. People had high hopes for him, and then he got shot. And it's amazing that he was able to come back as soon as he did. And as soon as he comes back, he has a big game. Okay, we're back, Ricky Pearsall. And then he didn't produce for a while. But down the stretch, towards the end of the season, he really showed his upside. And I think especially with the future being uncertain for Debo and Ayuk's injury. I think Jennings could be a pretty solid producer going forward.
I wanted to see a little bit more on Jacob Cowan this year. Didn't really happen. Everybody knows my love of Israel Abanikanda. I thought maybe when everybody else got hurt, he'd be able to show a little bit. Didn't happen. So, but Ricky Pearsall, the first round pick, we kind of knew his talent. Like you said, being shot didn't help much, missing time. But man, it's a comeback story. This guy really, towards the end of the season, he really put on a show. So I'm looking forward to after his sophomore year. I'm seeing a lot of big things out of Ricky Pearsall his sophomore year. 46 targets, 31 catches, 400 yards, and 3 touchdowns in his rookie season. Not for playing a half season, it's really not bad. So he could have been close to 1,000 yards if he played from the get-go. That's impressive for a rookie. So I'll take that. JT, Giants, good luck.
Yeah, so obviously the Giants an absolute cluster. I mean, what a mess. But I tell you what, if you took Malik Neighbors, you are stoked in Dynasty. I mean, with a disaster of a team, this guy still played his balls off all season long. I mean, it still amazes me. He finished as wide receiver 6 with just absolute horrid QB play. Wide receiver 6 in 15 games. So he missed 2 games and still finished as wide receiver 6. If he played a full set of 17 games, he would have easily jumped in the top 3. He would have been 3 or 4. Just an absolute fantastic season. 109 catches, 1,200 yards, 16 20-plus yard receptions. So they got him the ball deep. He had 7 touchdowns on a team that can't score at all. Miraculous. He had 7 touchdowns. 18.2 points per game in full PPR, 273 points overall. Finished just behind Drake London and ahead of Terry McLaurin and CeeDee Lamb. If you would have went into the season going, hey, he's going to finish with 10 more points than CeeDee Lamb in the same amount of games, people would have been like, no freaking way is Malik Neighbors scoring that many points. So, I mean, he's a bona fide stud. I mean, you cannot get him. There's no way you're trading for him. You're going to have to give up absolutely everything to get him. No one's going to get rid of him. And if the QB play improves at all, they go get somebody. I mean, who knows what we're going to see out of him. So, CeeDee Lamb, congratulations. If you got him on your team, you lucked out or you're a genius for taking him. I missed him in some situations where I probably should have taken him, and now I'm real pissed I don't have him because he was just, he was lights out. Lights out in a terrible situation. Amazing. So he's definitely I think an overachiever just because I would have never thought with this team that he would be able to do what he did. So he was absolutely freaking great. Underachiever has to be Daniel Jones. I mean, the guy gets freaking cut and he's a backup on another team now. I mean, if you were in a super flex league with Daniel Jones, you were counting on him, you were in trouble. I had one league where he was my second QB. I ended up winning the championship. And the only reason I ended up winning the championship was I didn't play a second quarterback most weeks. And I ended up playing Drew Lock when he had his monster game with Neighbors against the Colts, won me a title. It's unbelievable. So my boy Drew Lock came through me one time. So, but Daniel Jones, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with him going forward? Obviously on the Vikings, but I mean, he's not going to be on the Vikings. You don't think? I mean, you got Darnold, you got JJ McCarthy there. So where he goes and can he resurrect his career? I'm not betting on that. So, but Daniel Jones, an absolute just nightmare. So yeah, he was by far the easiest underachiever on a very underachieving team. To me, the riser is Tyrone Tracy. Now, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the draft if they actually go out and get running back, which I kind of think they will draft somebody. I couldn't believe Singletary. I thought he would be the guy for this team.
Right.
After about week 4, they just gave up on him, and it was Tyrone Tracy. So, but Tyrone Tracy, I mean, looking at a guy that basically played wide receiver all of college until his last year, transferred from Iowa to Purdue. This is a guy who, was basically a wide receiver. So you like the receiving profile. weren't sure what he would look like as a running back in the NFL. He impressed me. He was not a guy I was super high on coming out of the draft. I just didn't know how he'd work as a running back. Like, I liked his receiving, the fact that he could catch out of the backfield, but I didn't know what he'd be like running between the tackles. He was actually pretty solid. He finished his RB 26 in Fantasy Pro scoring. Pretty nice. If you had him, he was good. He had just finished under 1,000 yards, finished with 839 yards rushing. He was able to get 5 touchdowns, got the receptions, 38 catches, 284 yards on touchdown there, average double figures. And really, he probably would, if he would have started the year as the starting running back, he would have got to 1,000 yards because he didn't really start seeing playing time until about week 5. And week 5, they gave him the lead role. He had 18 carries for 129 yards against Seattle in that game. And then from there, he had a couple games where he was banged up, so he didn't get as many carries. But from there, he was pretty solid. He was a decent flex play for you, fantasy wise, going on week 5. So I like him. He's a guy I would acquire if I could. I traded for him in a couple leagues early in the season. The draft is going to be interesting to see what they do there with the draft, or if they go into next year with him as the lead running back. But I was highly impressed with the year that Tracy had. I didn't see that coming at all. I did not think he would be as good as he was.
Yeah, he's almost a 6th-round draft pick. I think he was like 532 or 531 or right around there somewhere anyway. And then, I just thought I chased the Antonio Gibson dream for the last 7 years, or 6 years, and it just never panned out. I mean, Antonio Gibson had flashes. And I'm thinking, man, I'm not going to get myself in this love fest with another Antonio Gibson and have it blow up my face over the years and not be able to. But I tell you what, man, he had some pretty damn good games. And if I'm buying anybody on this team, I'm buying Theo Johnson as my guy for that's my over to. And he got hurt this year. He showed some glimpses. Theo Johnson is who I would want for the Giants going forward. I don't trust running backs that much, especially guys who are late round picks that show flashes. They could bring their guy in here next year and just take over that role. So the Tyrone Chasey role, but I like Theo Johnson a lot. I traded up in a lot of rookie drafts to get. I liked him in college, so that's my guy. But yeah, this is a tough team to analyze. And I thought when Greg Dulcich came here, I'm like, yes, I get to see the hair, the wonder of the awesome hair, Greg Dulcich, and he didn't do shit here either, man. It's just the whole offense just needs minus Malik Neighbors, just a shit show, So it is what it is. Jeff, my Trevor Lawrence's Jaguars. That's tell me about them.
Well, I should probably talk about Brian Thomas Jr. here, but my overachiever is Tank Bigsby. Given his disappointing rookie campaign, 2024 was a shock to me, especially since we assumed ETN would lead the team on the ground. So, I mean, for Tank Bigsby, he's definitely the overachiever. The underachiever, I'd like to actually name 2 because I kept going back and forth. The first one was Trevor Lawrence. Even before his injury, he's only putting up 205 yards per game. It was the worst of his career. And then I think he was averaging 1.1 TDs per game, which was second worst. So with all of that, you figure, well, okay, the run game is going to flourish, right? Well, not Travis Etienne, who really burned me in several leagues. He finished borderline RB3, RB4. So when you're drafting him as a late RB1, early RB2, having him finish there was just disastrous. At least it was for me. And then my offseason riser, I could have went Brenton Strange here, but I went Parker Washington. He may have an opportunity as a number 2 or 3, given that Christian Kirk is oft injured. I'm not pursuing him directly, but if he was thrown in as a complimentary piece during a trade, if he was offered, I'd probably stash him. He may not do anything, but I'm not seeing anybody there, at least from my perspective, that I would want. He might be somebody, either him or Strange, I would target.
It's funny because Etienne only had 160 yards less than Bigsby for rushing the ball. He had 5 less touchdowns, but he had 40 more receptions. Or what is it?
John, if you look at it, like Bigsby actually had a 200 more yards rushing than Etienne. They finished right next to each other, 35 and 36 in Fantasy Pro scoring, 130.2 for Etienne and 129, 1 point less for Bigsby, even though Bigsby had 32 less catches. So, I mean, if you're looking at half PPR or no PPR, think Bigsby was the guy to have over him. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, ETN just buried your team. If you had him this year, if you took him high, I mean, he just crushed you. I traded in the offseason for Najee Harris and Christian Kirk, and people just ripped me. They're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I like Najee more than I like ETN. And I was like, I needed wide receiver help. So I went with Christian Kirk. So, and I got buried in that trade, and it worked out for me. My team was way better because of it. But yeah, man, ETN, where do they go moving forward with him?
I don't know where they go. Him or Bigsby. I don't want either one of them on my team. So Bigsby can't catch and ETN can't run. So it's like if you mix both of them players into one player, they'd be awesome.
Yeah, between the two of them, have one functional running back.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, there you go. Ian, you get the lucky Jets. You know, just for an FYI, I was in a championship game in a Dynasty League, which I lost by 1.7 points. But I started Aaron Rodgers. He got me minus 1.72. So if I would have just not started a quarterback in the championship game whatsoever, I would have won. And I started Aaron Rodgers, and it just shit like that just makes you want to just throw your computer down, never watch fantasy football again. You know, who would have thought a guy who was scoring like 22, 24, 26 points last couple weeks. And then the worst kicker is the week after when nobody even needs a guy. Fantasy football is over with. He scores 34 points. It's like, I just want to walk in my screen and just punch that piece of shit, you know?
Hey, bud, I'm still doing this.
Yeah, dude, that's so brutal, man. Rodgers, yeah, John, I know because I traded him to a couple people that were in the hunt, and I said the apology, like, I'm sorry, because they like played Rodgers in their championship and he buried them. I was like, oh, I'm glad I got that 3rd round pick for him, or a second or whatever, because man, nothing worse than scoring 0 is one thing, but scoring negative points and you lose because of the negative points is just, that's the worst of the worst of the worst.
And to lose by less than 2 points in the championship, and the guy scores you negative 2 points on, that was just that. It just, man. And I only had one quarterback. That was the only quarterback I had. I traded for Jameis Winston. I traded for Derek Carr. I lost Trevor Lawrence. I lost Dak Prescott. Like, I had everything go wrong on this team. And I'm like, all right, finally, somebody traded me a 3rd round pick for Aaron Rodgers. I'm going to try and make it happen. And it actually cost me a championship by having Aaron Rodgers on my team.
Well, you're not going to like my overachiever because because if you're looking for performance versus ADP, it's Aaron Rodgers. He was, especially in a dynasty league and like a Superflex dynasty league, he's one of the last QBs, one of the last starting QBs off the board, and he actually finished as a high-end QB2. So, the week 17 notwithstanding, he actually, and he was pretty inconsistent. But if you're just looking at his total points, he actually was pretty solid.
Some big weeks, yeah.
Yeah, my underachiever, unfortunately, because I have him everywhere, is Breece Hall. I love the talent. He is, he's a great running back, but the Jets are just a dysfunctional organization. I can't think of a more cursed franchise in the NFL, maybe the Browns, but like the Jets are just, every year it is just a dumpster fire. He was being drafted as a top 3, top 4 running back in redraft and dynasty. And he finished as an RB2. So, I don't know if he buried people this year, but he definitely was disappointing. And then for Riser, this is tough because again, the Jets are they're hard to trust. I think Breece managed to recoup some of his value, and he's actually not a bad buy low right now. Because I think people were disappointed with him. But I'm going to go, even though he had a solid season and he was already valued pretty highly, Garrett Wilson is probably my riser. He took a hit after he fell out of favor with Aaron Rodgers, and Devontae Adams came, and Rodgers was just force feeding Adams every game. But who knows what the QB situation next year will be? Who knows if Adams will be there? So I think Wilson, he's still, I don't know if he's an elite talent, but he's a very, very good wide receiver, and people might be feeling disappointed with him. So he might be a good riser.
He is an elite talent, and he is a riser. It's fantastic. I wasn't thinking so big, though. I was thinking Braylon Allen would be my riser for this team. I love Braylon Allen. Another guy, just a thumper. Somebody who I think could do a lot if he ever had like the straight opportunity, get his continuity going, get used to the offense. Braylon Allen's another one of those guys, just a big dude. He can catch the ball. He was underrated. He got drafted in like the 4th round. I just think that he's someone who if he had the role consistently, I think he'd be a big asset. But just to say for Garrett Wilson, yes, even though he had 1,000 yards, that's still not we expected it for a guy like him. 155 targets, 101 receptions, great season. But at the same time, man, I think people wanted more. It just wasn't enough. So I get it.
Well, people had such sky high hopes, like, oh, he finally has a quarterback, because last year Aaron Rodgers comes in, plays for like 30 seconds, and his season's done, and Garrett Wilson had to suffer through another season of terrible quarterback play. So finally, we got Aaron Rodgers. This is the year the Jets are going to do something, and yeah, people just were disappointed with that offense.
Yep. JT, Lions, everybody's favorite team, the Super Bowl. Everybody wants to see the Lions and the Bills in the Super Bowl. But tell me about the Lions, JT.
All right, so I'm going to start with my riser. I think he also overachieved, but I'm not going to put him in both categories, and that's Jameson Williams. I mean, he was on everybody's shit list. Let's be honest. Like, people were just like, what is he going to do? Should you get him? Should you trade him away? What can you get for him last year? And I mean, this is a deep team. This is a lot of mouths to feed in Detroit, but they were able to get him in the mix and do some stuff. He ended up finishing as wide receiver 22. Obviously, the injuries to Nico Collins hurt him, but he actually finished ahead of Nico Collins and Zay Flowers, which, for everybody kind of talking to how good they thought Zay Flowers' season was. Jameson Williams actually had a better season than Zay Flowers, who made the Pro Bowl. So Jameson Williams, 22, 58 catches, 1,001 yards, 17.3 yards a catch. He was that deep threat that everybody was wanting. He was able to get you touchdowns. He got 7 TDs this year, 14.1 points per game, over 200 fantasy points. He was actually surprising. He played 2 more games than AJ Brown, but he was literally 4 points behind AJ Brown. So if you had Jameson Williams, you were really, really happy about what he did for you. So he's my riser on this team. He's a guy I think that people are going to want to try to go out and get. Just super surprising what he did this year. I liked him a lot there. My underperformer, and again, a guy I think he's a really good player, just didn't have the season people were expecting, and that was Sam Laporta. Now, I don't know if there was anywhere to go but down for him after his rookie year. He had such a great rookie season. I just didn't think there was any way he was going to meet those expectations. And he didn't for a lot of people. Now, was he bad? Absolutely not. He finished his tight end 8. So he was still a top tight end. He was still a tight end 1. But he just didn't have the blow up year because of so many mouths to feed. He had 60 catches, 726 yards. Again, both good, but not as good as last year. So that's the problem there. 7 touchdowns. So he still got you in the end zone in 16 games. 10.9 fantasy points per game. Like I said, finished as tight end 8, but he just didn't give you as much as I think people were expecting of him. Still averaged double digits at 10.9 in a regular PPR format. And so a guy I'm not moving on from, not getting rid of. If somebody's mad about him, which I can't think that most people would be, then maybe you can go get him. But it is what it is as far as tight ends. It was just kind of a down year for tight ends. A lot of guys just slightly underperformed, even if they weren't bad, which he wasn't. So he was kind of my underachiever, I think, just for fantasy aspect. I think people just were expecting so much from him. The overachiever, and this one's a little tough because I don't know if he really overachieved, but Jahmyr Gibbs, I mean, just monster year. So, I mean, I think he was drafted high. People expected a lot of him, but I don't think everybody thought they were going to get what they got. So, I mean, I think people were hoping, they were wishing that he would have a great year, and he ended up having a great year. With Barkley sitting out the last week, he actually, in PPR formats, ended up as running back number 1 overall, 362 points. In Fantasy Pros scoring, 21.3 points per game. So he finished just behind Barkley, just under a point less per game average than Barkley, but ended up with Barkley sitting out that last game, ended up with 7 more points than Barkley. Just a monster year, 1,400 yards on the ground. Crazy 5.6 yards per carry. I mean, 5.6. I mean, that's phenomenal. He was only behind Barkley and Henry in yards per carry. 16 TDs. That was the big mark. Everybody's like, hey, with Monty there, is he going to get touchdowns or is Monty going to get all the touchdowns and you're just going to be left disappointed? Nope. 16 touchdowns out of Gibbs. Caught the ball like you expected, 52 catches, 517 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air. He was one of those guys, everybody looped, that 200 size mark. Hey, is he too small? Is he just going to be too small in the NFL? Well, he proved everybody wrong this year. He's definitely not too small. He's got the speed. He's got the quickness. He's on an awesome offense. Everything you want for fantasy. Gibbs is going to be an impossible get. If you don't have him, you're not going to get him. There's no one's giving him up. Absolutely no one's going to give him up. I don't care what you offer. You're not going to be able to get Gibbs. He's the overachiever, and not because he didn't have high expectations. He did, but the fact is that he had the high expectations and still overachieved, I think speaks volumes of what kind of special season he had.
In that team I talked about before that was super awesome that I got Barkley for, I had another, somebody else's like 109, 110, I think it was. And I needed another running back. And I'm like, all right, I'll give you one. I think I traded away 109 for, I sent an earlier trade for Gibbs, and the guy denied it. So I took the 109 just to get Chase Brown. I'm like, all right, I need another running back here. The guy had everything except running backs when I took over this team. 2 seconds after that, I got an inbox message from the guy saying, would you give me the 109 for Jahmyr Gibbs? I'm like, oh, I just traded for Chase Brown 2 seconds ago. Like, if I would have waited, like, I would have had Chase Brown. I would have had Jahmyr Gibbs and Barkley on top of this awesome team. I would have just started peeing my pants. I would have been like, yes. I would have walked the next.
Dude, I love Chase Brown, but that hurts. Oh, man, that hurts.
Oh, it so does. It so does. So now that I'm depressed, Jeff, talk about the Packers. Stop me from crying.
All right, talking about the Packers is depressing, but that's okay. My overachiever is Tucker Kraft. The improvement was anticipated, but on a team with numerous pass catchers, Kraft being targeted 70 times and going 707 yards with 7 tutties was very nice to see. So again, that maybe a little bit stretch calling him an overachiever, but I think that fits the bill. My underachiever is Jaden Reed. Love the Sparty, but he led the team in receptions, receiving yards, and was only second in scrimmage yards and TDs to Josh Jacobs. But his disappearing act after week 9 was tragic. And I think he only had 4 solid games in the first 9 weeks. So if you were counting on Jaden Reed to be a consistent contributor or to even be there as you made your playoff push, he let you down big time. And then my offseason riser, I got a couple of them here, but I would say Emmanuel Wilson. With Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd in the mix, Wilson may not have many opportunities in 2025, but his performance in 2024 warrants at least a stash on rosters if you have the spot, especially because we don't know how Lloyd will rebound. We have to monitor that situation. If I can get him, that's somebody if he's not sitting there on the waiver wire still, you should be able to pick him up relatively inexpensively. And if you have a deep roster, I'm willing to stick him on the roster and see how things go.
I had to go to the bathroom, Kevin. Stop it. Get out of here. I'm old. I'm 50 now. He calls me old all the time. So, but anyway, let's go to the next team here on the list, which is the Panthers. Ian, you got the Panthers?
Yes. So the overachiever is going to be Chuba Hubbard. I think a lot of people viewed him as a placeholder, kind of a rental for, until Jonathan Brooks got healthy, and Jonathan Brooks had setbacks and Chuba just kept producing. I think people, I don't know if their expectations were super high, but he just delivered week after week after week. And even if Brooks had come back earlier or hadn't retorn his ACL, I think it would have been hard to get Chuba off the field because he was just playing so well. Underachiever, I'm going to go with Xavier Leggett. I think he was kind of a polarizing prospect. A lot of people saw this tremendous upside because his final year was so dominant. But also people saw a lot of red flags because it took him so long to actually do anything. And he was kind of an older prospect. Thielen and Coker are just ahead of him in the pecking order, and he didn't really do much for fantasy. For riser, I got to go with Bryce Young. He got benched and his value really took a hit. And you got the Red Rocket coming in and looking like he was going to be the better option, and then he kind of fell off a cliff too. But towards the end of the season, Bryce Young wasn't just good; he was borderline elite. And it was in week 18. It didn't matter for fantasy, but he put up 40 fantasy points in week 18. And he is a solid QB2 in Superflex leagues. I think you're going to be really happy if you have him. Maybe people aren't believing in the talent, and you can try to get him, but I think he's on an upward trajectory for sure. If you look at his keep trade cut value from the time he was benched until now, it's basically doubled in value. So he is definitely on the rise.
Yes, it's Jalen Coker, I think I'm not going to say the biggest surprise here, but I think people expect things, not as much as what he produced though. To be someone of his stature, where I believe he was UDFA, right? I mean, I think he wasn't drafted, right, Jalen Coker?
I don't believe so.
But he, for him to be undrafted and do that, now I understand it has to do with some injuries around him, but man, talk about it. Legette was somebody who there's a lot of questions about him anyway in college. There's a lot of questions about him coming to the NFL. I think a lot of people had a lot of positive outlook on him. 84 targets, 50 receptions for 500 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he was hurt a lot too. So how many games did he miss this season? 1, 2, 3, and then he got hurt in a couple games too. So and he dropped a couple touchdowns too. He had dropsies in a couple games, which kind of hurt him too. But I think Legette's someone that I'm going to keep. I'm definitely going to be optimistic about his future. JT, you're a big Legette fan, right? I mean, it's someone you like a lot.
Yeah, he was a guy, he was that late breakout at South Carolina. I liked him a lot. I took him in a lot of places because he was dropping to like late first, early second round in some spots. So I took him in a lot of spots where he kind of dropped in drafts. I thought it would be a year. I never thought when I drafted him, like, oh, I'm going to be putting him in my lineup, starting him every week as a rookie. I never thought that. So I think if you did think that, you were probably disappointed in him. I do like the upside. I think the offense got better. I think Bryce Young, what he did, kind of rejuvenating himself near the end of the year. I like Legette going forward. I was under the impression that it was going to take him a year or two before you got to really see a lot out of him as far as fantasy production. So I was willing to wait on him. If somebody was expecting immediate production on a bad Panthers team, I think you probably were selling yourself short if you thought that was going to happen right away. But I still like Legette. He's definitely a guy. If somebody's out on him, I would not hesitate to try to acquire him.
He throws his body around a lot. He's kind of like I'm not saying he's Mike Williams, like that kind of jump ball kind of. He just seems like throw his body all over the place and get hurt. Like he has like these. If you ever look at him, he's like diving all over the place and jumping everywhere, and he lands funny. And not like Mike Williams where you go for jump balls and land in your back and hurt your hip kind of thing like that. But it's just weird watching him play. So I have a lot of expectations for him for Legette also. But I was a little bit more optimistic than what he showed this year. But I mean, he still did okay. I think that he can come back and take his role back for sure. I'm not throwing in a towel yet, but he's if somebody wants to get rid of him, I'd gladly pick him up my 25 round teams, 30 round teams for sure. He's there somewhere. He might be the number one guy next year. Who knows? That's where I got him.
I think he fits as a wide receiver too on that team. And I think if that's what his role is going to end up being, I think that's nice. I still think they need a dominant number one. Now, is that going to be? Do they go get like a Tet McMillan from Arizona in the draft in the top 10? I think that would be really nice if you have Bryce Young. I think that would be awesome there. So that's who I would do. That's what I would do if I was the Panthers, because I think Legette's going to be a nice number 2 and a solid like fantasy flex play. I just don't know if he's ever going to be like that breakout number 1 star receiver on your team. I don't know if I see that out of him.
I don't think we're going to see him dominate in the NFL like he dominated in his last season in college. I don't think that's in the cards for him.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so
be right back.
Let's go to the Patriots, JT.
I'm going to start out with my riser, and I think it's Keyshawn Butte. A guy that was like a Debbie darling at LSU. People absolutely loved him. Then he had, kind of a falling out with the coaches, had some issues there. Fell way down in the draft. I think he ended up going in the 6th round, I think it was. But he fell way down. Slow start to this season, but he really kind of came on at the end of the year. Big week 18 game. Obviously, Bills sitting a lot of players, but still had 7 catches, 117 yards and a touchdown. Week 16, also against Buffalo, he had 5 catches for 95 and a touchdown. So this is a guy I think if I'm looking for a riser, obviously the Patriots need help at wide receiver. They need to go get some more talent. I just brought up Tet McMillan for the Panthers. I think Tet would be awesome with the Patriots if they could go get him. But I think Butte is going to find his way onto the field next year and be one of the main guys for Drake May. I think he could easily end up being their wide receiver too next year. So Butte, he's a guy I like. If he's sitting out there on your waivers, go grab him. If you have to trade for him, I think you could get him for a reasonable price. But I like him. He's my riser. For the
He's
Patriots.
on the field all the time. He's on the field all the time. He's out there like 85 to 95% of every snap. He's out there all the time. He's still 22 years old. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Boots. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I just think he's got a lot of room to grow. I really do. I think, depending on who the new coach is going to be and how they view him could change things a little bit. But if you look at, snap percentage, after week 6 of the season, starting week 6, he was on the field for basically 80 to 90% of the snaps after that point. So, I mean, that didn't always turn into production on the field as the Patriots were a pretty bad team. But the key is you got to be on the field at least, and so he's been on the field. So if he can get the next coaching staff likes him, I think he's a guy that I would be interested in acquiring. And part of the reason I'd be interested in acquiring is Drake May. I love Drake May. I moved down in a couple of drafts and drafted him and then picked up like another wide receiver. So I had a couple leagues where, our baby and boomers league, John, I moved down from pick 2 down to pick 4, took May and then acquired pick 8 in the process and then took Brian Thomas. So I was like pumped about that move that I got both those guys. So Drake May, with how bad this New England team was, I think he was by far the overachiever of the year. I mean, I think people had super low expectations of Drake May this year. I think people thought he would suck. And he, despite how bad, New England basically had the worst offensive line in the league. I mean, they were horrible. I mean, their line, if you looked at every advanced metric, every PFF grades, everything, their O-line was terrible. And he still made plays. And he still did. So the fact that he was able to accomplish what he did on just an absolute horrid team, I think just screams that Drake May is a buy. He's a guy you want moving forward. The fantasy stats weren't fantastic, but they were way better. I think he's just one of those guys, like, his stats were just better because you almost expected nothing out of him. But he showed, like he did in college, that he can run the ball. He had 421 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, nice. Real, only 2,200 passing yards. The fact that he, didn't get the start at the beginning of the year, well, that helped her. Excuse me. Whether that helped or hurt him, I don't know. But it obviously his stats, end of the year stats, looked worse because he didn't start the whole year. But to me, Drake May is an absolute buy. The fact that this team is as bad as they are and he was able to still play as well as he did, I think was damn near miraculous. My absolute terrible under is Robert Stevenson. What has happened? Where have you gone? What has happened to you, man? He was a guy I thought I was getting in some. I got him in some redraft leagues really late, thinking I got this absolute steal. I'm like, oh, look at where I got him so late. He ended up being RB 28, 11.7 points. Not horrible in 15 games. But here's the fact: he just barely finished in front of Kareem Hunt, Javonte Williams, and Alexander Madison in fantasy production. Listen to that group. Oh my God. Talk about guys you don't want. Alexander Madison and Javonte Williams. The fact that Kareem Hunt only played 13 games and came out of nowhere and basically was a better option than Ramondre Stevenson it's just brutal. So only 3.9 yards per carry against, again, a terrible offensive line. He got saved by 7 touchdowns. I went back and looked at it. I was like, how did he have 7 touchdowns? It didn't seem like he had that many. 33 catches, not terrible, but 168 yards. He only had 168 yards receiving, and that's what we liked about him. That's what everybody in fantasy wanted. I was like, oh, he catches the ball in the backfield. He'll be great. 168 yards receiving this year. Just brutal. I don't know where we're going with Stevenson. If somebody's got a good idea, let me know. But he's tough, man. He's tough.
JT, when him and Gibson, when they took on Antonio Gibson and his team, I'm like, no. I was expecting Gibson to go somewhere else and have Ramondre Stevenson on one team, Antonio Gibson somewhere else, and then take, Ramondre Stevenson would have the rushing yards and the receiving yards, or bring an early down pounder on this team, or just keep, some of the players he already have on his team, like who's the other guy that's the Harris? Who's it? Kevin Harris. Keep Kevin Harris to be an early down pounder, and keep. I thought it was a great combination. Have Michael Hasty come out, catch the ball a little bit too, but as get a puff. But when I brought Gibson on here, I'm like, oh, there goes Ramondre Stevenson's receiving yards. But then his rushing yards weren't that good either. I know it had to do with bad offensive line, but he started out the season with 25 fantasy points in week 1. And then from there, took a hit. He only had 1 or 2 more usable weeks the entire season for Ramondre Stevenson. He just completely disappointed everybody, especially guys who had him for the last couple of years in their team like me, and we're kind of banking on him to have a good year this year.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was with you. I liked Antonio Gibson. I was kind of pissed when he went there because I was like, well, that kind of screws both those guys for me. And then again, the terrible O-line play, there was just nothing you can count on there. So Stevenson's the guy I don't want moving forward. Obviously, if you have him on your team, I think you're just eating it at this point because you're not going to get anything decent for him unless you throw him in a gigantic package of a bunch of players and he's like a throw in. But yeah, he just disappointing because so many people thought he had such good potential 2 years ago. You're like, I looked at the draft. I got him in a redraft league in the 4th round, 2 years ago. And I was like pumped. I got him in the 4th round. And now it's just like, oh my God, I don't even know if I want to spend any draft capital on him whatsoever.
I'm afraid this is going to be Tyrone Tracy. This is what scares me a little bit, about Tyrone Tracy, but whatever. It is what it is. Jeff, Raiders.
Well, for overachiever, everyone wants me to say Brock Bowers, and I probably should, but I am going to go with Jacoby Myers. Myers had his first 1,000-yard receiving season, and he had career highs in targets and receptions. His TDs were off, but then again, nobody was scoring in Vegas. So I think just, Brock Bowers, obviously, breaking the records and doing what he did as a rookie is phenomenal. But if I'm going to say someone's overachieving, I'm going to go with Jacoby Myers. Underachiever, I'm going to go with Michael Mayer. Bowers' entrance was going to ding Mayer, but he was still anticipated to be a tight end too. With Adams' departure, Devontae Adams' departure, I definitely anticipated him that he would benefit. But then suddenly his NFI departure diminished his role for the team, and then he never really came back from that. So he was really really provided nothing for fantasy owners. The early dynasty projections for him in 2025 still have him as a low tight end 2, but unless he's moved from the Raiders, I don't trust that. But we also do need to see what the Raiders are going to do for QB in the offseason. So I really think he was the underachiever in a Raiders team that was underachieving everywhere. And then my offseason riser, either Trey Tucker or Sincere McCormick. This team is desperate for pass catchers, and other than Bowers or Myers, no one is impressive at RB. So, those could prove worth rostering, but not at any real cost. I'm not pursuing them.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping. I'm not. I heard a bunch of rumors about Mayer. I'm not going to say what I heard about why he wasn't here the first half of the season. But I was expecting that to be definitely a 1-2 punch with 2 great tight ends in a tight end premium league. I have both of them in a bunch of teams, and I'm going to keep it that way too. It's not a problem for me because one of them's going to go somewhere else, probably Mayer sooner anyway. But they're both great receiving back. When they took, how many people were in shock at the draft window when they said, we already, I just traded for Michael Mayer in like 5 leagues, and all of a sudden, the Raiders take Brock Bowers. I'm like, what the shit was that? Like, there's no reason for, like, I was so pissed when they took Bowers. I'm like, now obviously it's nice to have both of them on the same team, but Bowers fell in a lot of draft because they figured that Mayer was already there. Bowers, they knew what they had, but terrible situation. But my person that I kind of expect a little bit more that was, call me crazy, but like I wanted Dylan Lobb to have a little bit more of a role here. So I don't know what happened there, but that's just I expected him to have at least a couple touches this year, but he had 1 rushing attempt for like 2 yards the entire season. I'm like, what the hell? It didn't work out. Hopefully, I don't even think it's going to work out. Who knows what's going to happen with this? And I'm not sure why they don't have any. They didn't give him a chance whatsoever. The rest of the rushing stunk. He must be that bad. I totally misevaluated him if that's the case. But it is what it is. Ian, you got the Rams here. You're on mute. There you go. It's not working too good. We have a technical issue with Ian. He's going to talk about the Rams. Still nothing yet.
Nope. Is that
I'll take over the Rams while he's getting ready.
The technical difficulty. It's that kind of day.
It happens. He doesn't have it written down, but we'll talk about the Rams right now with the team he's got. So,
do you want to skip real quick, John, and go to the?
Yeah,
I'll do the Ravens, and then we'll come back here.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, Ravens, my overachiever. Hard to believe you're saying he's an overachiever, but Derrick Henry, everybody had pretty big expectations when he went to the Ravens this year that he would have a good season, but he had a phenomenal season.
Can you hear me now?
There he is. Ian, you're in. There he is.
I don't know what happened there.
Let JT finish his team, and we'll go to you next.
I'll finish the Ravens, and we'll come back to you. But Derrick Henry, top 4 running back on the year. Over 300 fantasy points. Fantasy Pro scoring was 19.8 points per game, so just under 20 points per game, which is pretty unbelievable, especially the fact that he only had 19 receptions on the season for 193 yards, but running the ball 5.9 yards per carry, almost 6 yards a carry is unheard of in the NFL these days. 1,921 yards, just missing the 2,000 mark. Just an unbelievable year. I had big expectations that he was going to have a nice season, but was I thinking he was going to approach 2,000 yards in 16 touchdowns. Just great year for Derrick Henry. So anybody who stayed strong, I traded him just a hair too early in some rebuilding teams. I did not get full quality as what I could have got in return after this year, but man, great year for him. So he was definitely my overachiever. My underachiever, and it seems kind of weird when you look at the stats, but it was Mark Andrews at tight end. So even though Mark Andrews still finished as tight end 6 on the season, averaged 11.1 points per game, but only had 188 points. So even though he was tight end 6, he was way down. Only 55 catches this year, 673 yards, and he played in 17 games. So that's the thing is you would have thought, okay, if he's got those numbers, he missed some games. He absolutely got saved by touchdowns. He had 11 touchdowns this season, and if it wasn't for the touchdowns, you would have been extremely, extremely disappointed having Mark Andrews on your team. He literally, at the end of the year, I think he had 6 straight games to finish off the season with touchdowns, and he had 8 touchdowns in his last 10. So it was literally touchdowns or bust for him. The receptions weren't there. Season high, he had 6 catches twice in a game. He did not go over 100 yards receiving in one single game this year. Not one. So for him, expecting to kind of be the number 1 option there for the Ravens, to me, underachieving year for him, even though he technically finished as tight end 6, the stats weren't there. The numbers were not there that you usually expect out of him. And again, you were absolutely saved by touchdowns for him. The riser for me, this one's a little tough. I'm going to go with Zay Flowers. It's always been the issue with the Ravens since they've had Lamar. People are like, hey, can the Ravens have a wide receiver 1? Can they put that out because they've just really, really struggled with wide receivers. Zay Flowers finished as wide receiver 25 this year, 74 catches, over 1,000 yards, was able to get 4 touchdowns, had 209 points on the season. So over that 200-point barrier, 12.3 average per game. So he was in that double figures. So if you have people who still don't believe in Zay Flowers, I like Zay a lot. I think news just came out he's going to miss the playoff game, which is going to hurt the Ravens there. But I like Zay Flowers. I think he's kind of the riser on this team. And outside of him, I just don't know where they go. I mean, you saw the Deontay Johnson situation, absolute disaster, got there, didn't play at all. Rashad Bateman, another guy that got absolutely saved by touchdowns. If it wasn't for touchdowns, he would have been a complete absolute bust this year as well. So there's just not a lot of other guys I see. I mean, people had Des Walker, the rookie out of North Carolina. Some people were high on him. I really did not like the landing spot with the Ravens. I was not feeling good about it. And was he even on the team this year? I mean, I watched a lot of Ravens games and I never saw him in the game. So he's going to need to have a huge comeback if he's going to do anything on this team. So I just don't think there's a lot of guys to choose from, but I guess my riser, would be Zay Flowers, because he's one of the few guys I would go out there and try to acquire on this Ravens team.
I've had my Rashad Bateman love, kind of smushed for the last couple of years. So he had 750 yards on 72 targets and 45 receptions with 9 touchdowns. I mean,
the touchdown saved him. I had him in a deep league where I played him every week in a flex spot because I was desperate. But again, you got saved on the touchdowns. Again, depending on how you looked at it, if you didn't expect anything out of him, you were like pretty pumped about what you got out of him this year. But if you were still one of those people who were like, was dreaming that he's still going to be like this really good fantasy wide receiver, you were slightly disappointed.
I tell you what I was disappointed with. I mean, I'm not disappointed whatsoever with Derrick Henry, what he did, but I was expecting Rasheen Ali to have like a little bit more of a role in like the back, like kind of the backup role. And man, talk about like just kind of out of that. He had 10 rushing attempts the entire season and two
Yeah, he never could get healthy. He was injured all year. I was snagging him everywhere. I mean, I've got him on a million dynasty teams because I thought he was going to be the Derrick Henry backup. I thought he's like, okay, he's going to get some receptions. He's going to be that guy. He's going to be in the mix. And it wasn't. I mean, it was Justice Hill all year. He never got healthy, never got in. We'll see if he can do something different next year. But I've got a million shares of him just sitting on my taxi squads and benches and being like, please let him have a role next year.
Even when he was healthy, he was just sitting on the sidelines or a healty scratch, or it's like, come on, man. Like, I mean, you knew that Derrick Henry was the only game in town. And hopefully he's going to come back next year and be the same bowling ball we saw this year. But man, Rasheen Ali was someone I expected to see a little bit of anyway. It killed me. But anyway, Ian, Rams, up to you. You can go back now that your mic's working.
All right, thank you. So my overachiever is Kyren Williams. I think he was kind of another polarizing player where people recognized that he had an elite role. I don't think anybody would question that he had an elite role, but maybe people weren't sold that he was an elite talent. And then when they drafted Blake Corum, people got spooked and people weren't sure if this was going to be kind of a 1A, 1B situation, if Kyren was going to maintain that role. Well, we needn't have worried because Kyren crushed this year. I don't know offhand where he finished. You guys know where he finished? Like what RB?
I can look it up, but I'm not sure exactly where it was.
Pretty. It was Kyren Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on Fantasy Pros scoring, he ended up finishing as. He ended up finishing as RB7 right behind Josh Jacobs. He had 17 points per game, 272 points, 1 spot behind Josh Jacobs, 1 spot ahead of James Cook.
Yeah, so I think you were pretty happy with Kyren's season. My underachiever's got to be Cooper Kupp. Really disappointing season. Obviously, he struggled with some injuries. And week 1, I think he had 21 targets. So we're back, baby. 21 targets for Kupp. Let's go. And then nothing else after that. And in Dynasty, especially, this is, Kupp is kind of he's a declining asset. Don't know how many years he has left. Maybe you can trade him, but probably going into the season, you're viewing him as a guy you're going to write off into the sunset and maybe take you to a championship and just ride him to 0. But after this season, I think you're riding him off to the glue factory. instead. He, I have Cup in a few leagues, and by the end, I wasn't even starting him because you just couldn't trust him. For riser, if we're just talking like purely rise in value, I think it's Puka. I mean, people were wondering if his rookie season was a fluke, but I think this season proved that it was not. I mean, he's just incredible, but obviously he's going to be hard to get. So if you're trying to buy somebody that maybe might have the opportunity to rise a little bit, maybe Jordan Whittington might be interesting. If Cup is no longer on the team, maybe he can slide into the wide receiver 2 role. But it's kind of a concentrated offense. You got Kyren, you got Cup, you got Puka, and then you got some sort of ancillary pieces that maybe they're good for a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, these guys, but none of them are really super interesting. So Jordan Whittington, he's young. He had a nice week 18 when they sat the starters. So possibly without Cup, he could be somebody going forward.
Yeah, Whittington is someone to buy right now. So is Blake Corum, because he didn't produce very well, and then he broke his arm now. I mean, fantasy football's over with, so a lot of people aren't looking at what's going on, minus playoff races. And, he's in the play. Other teams in the playoffs, they won't see him out there either. He's someone that you can get probably pretty cheap right now, a lot cheaper than what he probably will produce next year. So
right.
Whittington might have an opportunity, and Blake Corum are definitely some guys to go after right now if somebody's not happy with that performance from those fellers. So let's go to Jeff. You got the Saints now.
Okay, for the Saints, overachiever, nobody. I mean, Kamara had a decent year, but, by definition, did he actually overachieve? No. So the closest maybe Foster Moreau with 5 TDs. There just wasn't much on this team at all. So I mean, again, when I look at anyone that may have stood out, I just don't see anyone other than Kamara. But like I said, I don't necessarily think that he did more than what anyone would have expected. Underachievers, don't have anybody here other than 3 injured players. So you have Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Kendre Miller. Again, not fair when all 3 were injured, but these injuries were devastating to fantasy owners. I had several shares of Olave, Shaheed, a couple shares of Miller, and so that proved a little bit devastating for me, especially when I was really relying on Olave to step up. Miller has missed significant time his first 2 seasons, and it's really hard for any of these guys to achieve if they can't be on the field. My offseason riser, I guess, is the same. It's any of them. But for the most part, I would say if Kendre Miller can find a way to stay on the field and stay healthy, he's got to take over some of the share from Kamara as Kamara continues to age. Rashid Shaheed, he was looking kind of strong early on until his injury. I think that Shaheed is still someone that if he's out there, and I doubt that, he is, pick him up. There may be a lot of individuals who may be willing to move on from him, and you may be able to get him from a decent price. I'm not moving him off any of my rosters. It's just nobody on the Saints is really exciting at this point.
What's exciting is my son's teammate in high school, Xavier Valade, who went to Arizona State and USC, had a pretty good couple years, and then he just signed again with the Saints again. So hopefully he'll have some kind of opportunity. But he came out a little bit old, and that's going to be the norm now with this transfer portal stuff and all this money these guys are making in college. He'll be coming out like the normal age for people going on nowadays, it seems like. But I'm looking forward to. I wish him a good luck at going in the NFL, Zay. But a lot of disappointment on this team across the board. Yeah, Kendre Miller was someone I expected to to produce a little bit too. But again, it's just a lot of disappointment across the board on this team. And I think they're in an impasse. This team's on an impasse now with the finances and with age and with everything going on at one. They're in like terrible situation where you can see there's going to be 2 or 3 really pretty bad years for the Saints going forward. Coming forward, Ian, Seahawks.
So I think you could make a case for Charbonnet as an overachiever, but I'm going to go with Geno Smith, another quarterback that was being drafted pretty late and finished, depending on your scoring format, as a QB 13. And he did this with one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. He's not necessarily a good quarterback at like going through his progressions, but when it comes to hitting his first read target, he's actually really good, which is all he has time for with this offensive line anyway. So it actually works out pretty well. For my underachiever, I'm going to go with DK Metcalf. It's hard to say for sure, but it looks like his days as a dominant alpha in that offense are over with the emergence of JSN. Just really disappointing season for Metcalf. And also the offensive line play didn't give Geno and Metcalf enough time to develop these downfield plays. And then for the riser, I'm going to go with JSN. Really came on this year. I mean, he another one of these guys where drafted highly, disappointing first year, and then a nice second year breakout. Kind of when we were talking about Mims earlier, it kind of reminded me of JSN, where it's like these good prospects, they have a disappointing rookie year because they're not being used correctly. They're not being deployed correctly. Almost in the opposite way, where Mims was being used out wide and not getting any short area targets, and JSN was like a little screen merchant, just getting these behind the line of scrimmage dump off passes. And now that we're seeing their route tree develop, they're both starting to blossom. So JSN, obviously he's risen a lot, so he might be hard to get, but he's definitely taken a huge step forward this year.
Boy, if DK Metcalf gets traded in the offseason, we were waiting for Tyler Lockett to be gone. If Tyler Lockett and DK are both gone, I mean, JSN is going to be like a rocket ship. And he's already got 1,130 yards and 6 touchdowns this season. Man, he is. Charbonnet is an up-and-comer behind Kevin Walker. I mean, we saw what Charbonnet could do in a couple times when he had his, he had the whole backfield to himself. The guy, actually, I love Zach Charbonnet, one of my favorites. Noah Fantastic, I'm waiting for him to kind of 64 or 50 targets for 500 yards and a touchdown. He should have done better than that. There was enough to go around in this offense. A.J. Barner is probably the guy to grab in the future if you're in a deeper dynasty league. But, man, this I just don't know what's going to happen with this. Geno Smith was pleasantly surprising. 407 completions, 43 and 21, 4,300 yards and 21 touchdowns. Geno is Geno Smith is somebody I'd never target on my team, but he's great quarterback two to have on your team. I'm not sure what the future is going to hold there, but man, JSN is the rising star on this offense. So if you don't have JSN now, it's going to be hard to get him. If you can get him, grab him if you possibly can. So next, JT, you have what a coincidence. You got the Steelers and the Colts in the same show.
I don't know how that happened, but I'll take it. Oh man, I'll start with the over. I don't think anybody really overachieved on this team. The one guy I would say over probably was Najee Harris, just because so many people were down on Najee, especially if you listen to most Steelers fans, they think he's terrible. He didn't win you any leagues at all, but he was solid. I mean, if you had him as your RB2, you're pretty happy with what he gave you. Like I said, no big weeks. It wasn't like, oh, Najee saved me this week. You had none of that this year. But he still was decent. He ended up finishing as an RB2 on the year, finished at RB20 overall. Another 1,000-yard season. I know we knock it with the extra games and everything else, but that's 4 straight for him to start his career. Very rarely does that happen anymore. He did break the 200-point barrier, so he had 204 points. Average 12 games. Like I said, nothing sexy. Didn't have any huge outputs that absolutely won you a fantasy week, but he was pretty solid for the most part on what was a pretty disappointing offense this year for the Steelers. So if you had to have one guy, I mean, everybody kind of talked about Jaylen Warren taking his role, doing all that. So if you had Najee, you were happy with what he gave you, because you probably came in with fairly low expectations of what he was going to do this year for you. So the fact that he actually did get another 1,000 yards, he averaged double digits for the year. He ended up as RB20. I think if you had him like I did on a bunch of teams, I was pretty happy with what I got out of him. I thought it was maybe a little over what my expectations probably were. Now, underachievers, this list could be a mile long. It really could. This team, man, on offense they just were not good this year. I have to call him out, and I can't believe I'm doing this because I've done nothing but back him for like 2 years now, and that's George Pickens. Pickens just, man, you thought is like, okay, he's going to take over. He's going to be the alpha. He's going to be the wide receiver one, especially in a wide receiver room that was barren. I mean, they traded for Mike Williams and then barely even played him. Van Jefferson. I mean, the fact that Van Jefferson's your starting wide receiver just tells you how bad things are. Roman Wilson never took off, injured. Basically, they just never even talked about him the rest of the year, and he just never played. Still don't know what was going on there. But Pickens was the guy you're like, okay, if they're going to do anything, it's going to go through George Pickens. And while he had some nice games here and there, if you go and you really want to look at the full body of work for the season, really disappointing. He ended up as wide receiver 42 in a full PPR format. Wide receiver 42, 59 catches on 103 targets. So 103 targets, only caught 59 of those. Now, did have a lot of bad throws to him, but he did drop some at the end of the year, and he's usually a guy that is super sure-handed. Only 900 yards, didn't break 1,000 yards, just 3 touchdowns. Believe me, my pocketbook is killing because of that, because I don't know how many touchdown parlays I put in this year with George Pickens in it, and he did not hit them ever. 3 total touchdowns this year was just brutal for him. 11.7 points per game. Okay, he averaged double digits. But if you want to look at it in comparison, like, we talked about some of these other guys, he finished 1 spot ahead of Alec Pierce in overall scoring. Even though he only played 14 games, he really crushed you because when you needed him, he was injured with that hamstring, killed me in a ton of places where I was like trying to make the playoffs or in a playoff run where he missed games. Only played 14 games. So Pierce played 16, but 3 points difference is all they were different. Pickens averaged 1 more point per game than Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce is your third wide receiver on a team, and Pickens is your clear-cut number 1. For them to average 1 point difference is just wild, and especially if you look at targets, only 69 for Alec Pierce and 103 for Pickens. So it's going to be hard for me to justify Pickens all offseason because last year I was like, buy. He's great. He's great. He's going to be awesome. But the passing game wasn't there. He got frustrated, obviously, throughout the year. Is he going to be in Pittsburgh next year? Are they going to move on from him? Are they going to try to trade him? Things were not looking good there near the end of the season. I still like the talent. I still believe him as a player, but it's getting harder and harder to justify Pickens in fantasy. So he's definitely my underachiever on the year. Riser, I don't know. There's a ton of risers. The one guy I would still be going out and trying to get, and that's Pat Freiermuth at tight end. The passing game was ugly this year. People were down on Muth. I got him in the offseason in a couple situations where people were just like, I don't know how much they're going to throw. If he's going to decent, not a great year out of him, but he still finishes as tight end 9. So he was still a tight end 1, 65 catches, 653 yards. Really nice with 7 touchdowns. That's where he's kind of burned you early in his career. Is he's had the catches, he's had the yards, he just hasn't got the touchdowns. But he actually got touchdowns this year. If you were playing him in fantasy at the end of the year, he did come through for you down the stretch. He did have touchdowns. He had 4 touchdowns in the last 6 games of the season. So nice. Didn't see a lot of targets, but again, I think he's one of those guys I think you could probably still acquire for a decent price. I don't think he'd be too expensive, but I still like the talent. I hopefully the passing game improves in Pittsburgh. We'll see what they end up doing at QB. As it seemed like Russell Wilson was going to be the answer. Really nice games early on, and then he just absolutely fell apart down the stretch. Really, really ugly. So it's hard to want to invest in any of the receiving assets for the Steelers right now. But if I had to go out and get somebody, the riser for me would be Pat Freiermuth.
Man, George Pickens should have been like a mid wide receiver 2 with her early, high wide receiver 3 this year. And I had a couple opportunities to buy him for first round picks, and I'm really glad I didn't pull a trigger on that. But quick question, JT. Is Justin Fields going to have a job next year, or is he just going to be a backup somewhere?
So this is another one, Stuffy. I thought Fields should have started. I wanted him to start the whole year. I was pumped when he got the chance to start at the beginning of the year. I don't think he was nearly as bad as people made it out to be. The final game, I think the fact that they lost to the Cowboys really kind of hurt him there early on. But I don't think he should have totally got blamed for that. The Raiders game was by far his worst game of the year where he missed passes. But before that, I thought he was pretty solid. And the fact that he was able to move the pocket and run with his feet and make plays with his legs, I thought was something that they greatly missed once Russ came in. I think it hurt the offense. So I would love for Fields to be the future quarterback of the Steelers, but at this point, I have no idea what this team is trying to do, what their focus is going to be. Is Arthur Smith going to be the offensive coordinator again? Are people interviewing him for head coaching jobs just because, or do they really think they want him? I don't know. I'm very confused on when they're going to go moving forward. I like Fields. I think he should be the answer, but at this point, I don't know where this organization is going. If you believed in Fields, if you really did, it's hard to justify sitting in the whole second half of the season and then go, okay, well, we'll sign you in the off season. And yeah, we believe in you, but we just sat you for a whole year where you could have, he played well enough to stay as the starter, I think. Now, some people said, hey, he even said I needed to play better, but I think he needed time in the system. I think they would have actually been better down the stretch if Fields would have stayed in all year as opposed to Russell Wilson, which gave him a nice little boost when he first came in, but he lost all that brightness, all that shiny good. Everything that he did well right when he came in basically fell apart at the end of the year.
Yeah. Jeff, Texans.
Well, we can mention Nico Collins, but my overachiever is Joe Mixon. Mixon at age 28 put up, his second consecutive 1,000-yard rushing season with over 1,300 scrimmage yards. He had 12 TDs on the season, which tied last year's number. So, again, watching Mixon play, it doesn't look like he's lost anything at 28. So I'm going to give him the nod. Underachiever, obviously, CJ Stroud. He fell significantly in yards per game, yards per attempt, passer rating, and QBR. His touchdowns per game was down, and his interceptions more than doubled. With several subpar games and with such lofty expectations after his rookie season and everything they talked about in the preseason, this was an easy choice for me as underachiever. We all expect for him to bounce back next year, but this was hard, especially those who pursued CJ Stroud as either their starting QB or one of their two QBs in a super flex. Offseason riser. This one's a hard one. Someone could say, tanked out before he went down, but I'm going to say John Mechie or Xavier Hutchinson. If Dell remains healthy, then neither one of those are going to have much value in fantasy, but otherwise, one of them may provide a spark for the team. I'm not targeting either. I think John Mechie, for all the promise that he had early on and with all the health issues that he had to endure early on, he's just not. I don't think there's much promise there any longer. So those are my risers. If in fact Dell is unable to play.
Kate Stover and John Mechie are my definitely risers for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Even Damian Pierce had a nice last game. Too bad it's too little, too late. And I think a lot of it was just kind of whatever, get the season over, playing against backups kind of thing. But yeah, 100%. So Titans, Ian. We're almost done, guys. Two more to go.
This is my last one, and we saved the worst for last. My overachiever is going to be Nick Westbrook-Akine, another guy that was on waiver wires, has never been fantasy relevant. And it's not like he was super relevant this year, but he had a stretch weeks 6 through 13 where he was averaging a touchdown a game. He had 8 touchdowns in 8 games, and he did it on 20 receptions. So obviously that is not something that is sustainable. But if you were in a pinch and you needed a flex option or a third or fourth wide receiver, he definitely had some value, and I don't think anybody expected that kind of run from him. My underachiever, and this is hard because I think expectations were so low to begin with for everybody on this team. But I'm going to go with Will Levis. We saw flashes last year that maybe he could have some talent. He had that big game when he first came in, and he just was throwing bombs down the field last year. And then in the offseason, we see they add Calvin Ridley. They add Tony Pollard. They add Tyler Boyd. They're building a team around Levis. They're signaling that they're in on Levis and they're going to try to build this offense around him. And he just fell on his face. He has just about the worst pocket awareness I've ever seen. To his credit, he's looking downfield for that big play, but he has tunnel vision. And I think he just doesn't have any peripheral vision because he'll have a defender right next to him and he just won't see him and he will get crushed. And he got benched for Mason Rudolph. So that does not speak well of his performance. And then for my riser, I think I'm going to go with Tajay Spears. In the beginning, we had the coach speak about how Pollard and Spears are going to be, it's going to be a split backfield. It's going to be a 1A, 1B. And then it was pretty evident from the beginning of the season that this was Pollard's backfield. Spears really didn't do a whole lot. But then towards the end of the season, when he got an opportunity, I think all season long, he was under 50% of snaps. The first game where he got 50% of snaps, he started really producing for fantasy. So both he and Pollard are under contract. So who knows what's going to happen in next year or the year after. But I think Spears is probably a guy that might be under the radar for a lot of people. They might be disappointed in his overall fantasy finish, but he's probably someone whose value will rise.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a question here real fast. Traditionally, draft picks accrue value as you get closer to the rookie draft. I need a quarterback badly and could acquire Stroud. Are you making that deal, like a deal like that now or closer to the draft? It's already the offseason, and I think Stroud's pretty low right now. Depending on what kind of additions they make closer to the draft, in the NFL draft itself, if you're talking about closer to the rookie draft, I'm not sure they're going to add too many more offensive weapons to this team. So maybe running back, but that's going to be something that I think they're okay as wide receiver is concerned. I would probably wait closer to the rookie draft if I was him. That's when drafts, they're going to draft picks, just keep getting more starry-eyed in everybody's eyes when you get closer to the rookie draft. So if he's going for cheap right now or someone's looking to get rid of him because he had a bad season, I would just hold. I would hold until closer to rookie draft and then make the deal then. Because whoever is trying to get rid of him now obviously doesn't like him, and the closer they get to picks, the cheaper he's going to be. So,
yeah, especially if we're talking like, a first-round pick, it's only going to get more valuable after the NFL draft, after the combine, after OTAs. We're gonna see those people get the rookie fever, and people will really pay up to get those first-round picks.
JT, talk about our boy Sammy Darnold, baby.
Sam Darnold. I love it. We've only been talking about it for 2 years, John, about he just needed to be in the right spot. He just needed to be on a good team with a decent cast around him, with a good coaching, and he could flourish, and he did this year. Sam Darnold. If you had Sam Darnold, you were ecstatic. You expected absolute zero from him, and he had a fantastic year. So Darnold, just running through the stats, he ended up as a QB1. He ended up number 9 overall in Fantasy Pro scoring for quarterbacks, 319.8 points, number 9 overall. Finished just behind Jalen Hurts, Bo Nix, and Jared Goff in the rings there. So really nice season out of him. He finished ahead of Kyler Murray, ahead of Patrick Mahomes, ahead of Justin Herbert. So just a really great year out of him. The stats, phenomenal for Sam Darnold. 5th in the league in passing, 4,319 yards, 5th overall in passing touchdowns. That's the big, thing. Can he get touchdowns and can he not turn the ball over? 35 touchdown passes, 12 interceptions, ended up 5th in the league in overall touchdown passes and 35. Just outstanding season for him. Darnold's got to be the guy. The overachiever, absolutely Darnold. Outstanding season. Now we got to figure out what's going to happen when the offseason, depending on what happens here in the playoffs, if he takes them far, do you sign Darnold to an extension and hold on to J.J. McCarthy? Do you trade J.J. McCarthy? Do you let Darnold go? This is going to be one of the bigger things I think they're going to have to talk about in the offseason, what's going to happen here with Darnold. I think the playoffs are going to matter. If the Vikings make a run, it's going to be very hard for them to just turn around and dump Darnold. But outstanding season for him. I'm pumped for him. John, me and you were telling everybody to go get Darnold. I traded for him in a ton of spots prior to the year, especially once I heard J.J. McCarthy got hurt. I was like, oh, give me all the Darnold, because I thought he would be really good in this offense, and he was. So fantastic year for Darnold. Again, people forget about him. He's only 27 years old. I mean, people are acting like, oh man, Darnold, the dude has not even hit his prime yet. I mean, he came in the league at 20 and played for an absolute terrible Jets team. Nobody's going to succeed under those circumstances. We've seen a bunch of other guys try and have not been successful. So I think Darnold's got a spot. I think he's got a chance to use this season to actually, completely resurrect his career. If he is not with the Vikings, somebody's going to spend some money on him. I could see him getting kind of one of those Baker Mayfield 3 or 4 year deals. When he kind of had his breakout for the Bucs, I could see that happening as well. But he's definitely easily the overachiever this year. Riser for me is Jordan Addison. The questions were like, hey, is he, can he make it? He's a smaller guy. Can he do it in the pros? He's opposite Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's going to see all the targets. How valuable is Jordan Addison actually going to be for fantasy? Well, he ended up as fantasy wide receiver 21, averaged 14.2 points per game, had 212.5 points this year, 63 catches, 875 yards, 9 touchdowns, only playing 15 games, missed it, didn't get to the 1,000-yard mark, but he was one of those guys, as the season went on, he got better. And he had some big games down the stretch for fantasy purposes to help you out. Week 12 leading into the playoffs, had a 30-point game against the Bears where he had 8 catches for 162 and a touchdown. Then week 14, just an absolute monster game, saved a bunch of people, saved me and a bunch of leagues. He had 8 catches, 133 yards and 3 touchdowns against Atlanta. So just a really solid all-around year for him. I think he's just going to keep rising. I like where this Vikings team's at. And again, being the wide receiver 2 next to Justin Jefferson, I think only helps you. I think he can easily be a wide receiver 2 on his own team, but also for fantasy purposes moving forward. So Jordan Addison, I like him a lot.
Hey guys, I'm sorry to interrupt. I gotta run, but thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming out.
I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Ian. Bye. Appreciate it, man. My underachiever, I don't think anybody really underachieved for this Vikings team. If I had to pick one guy, I would say TJ Hawkinson. Now, obviously, he was coming off the injury, so you already knew if you had Hawk that you weren't going to get a lot out of him early on. I know a lot of people were requiring him, trying to hope that he had like a big, down the stretch, he would be good and help you in the fantasy playoffs. Ended up as tight end 34, but that was expected. Like we said, he missed the first half of the season, didn't play until week 9. Real issue for him, though, he had one big week in week 12, but beyond that week 12 game where he had 7 catches for 114 yards, he just didn't do much down the stretch. 0 touchdowns this season. If you're planning on getting production fantasy playoffs with him, he just didn't do much for you. So I think he's going to have a bounce back year next year with a full off season and being fully recovered, but not to knock on him because coming off the injury, you didn't expect a lot, but I think if you had to give an underachiever, he'd be the one guy that you thought you might get a little more out of at the end of the year.
I'm super afraid that this team is going to tag and trade Darnold next year to some team like Tennessee or some other, wait for JJ McCarthy to get like 5 or 6 weeks in and then make him the starter or get rid of Darnold. It scares the death out of me that's going to happen. And Darnold's going to go back to irrelevance. This is the perfect team for him, perfect setup for him, perfect coaching staff, perfect everything across the board. And man, I just feel that I hope he takes a long-term contract for a lot of guaranteed money that isn't a ton on every year and just stays here for a while with just a perfect scenario for him. But man, I'm kind of worried about him going back to, he had to deal with so much. I'm so happy he's in such a great place right now, but it just kind of scares me about his future. So, yeah. Jeff, the Washington football team. What can you tell us?
Okay, Washington. Overachiever Zach Ertz. For only the second time in his career, he started every regular season game, and this is the most receiving yards he's had since 2021. His 7 TDs were the most since 2018. His catch percentage and yards per target were also his best since 2018. No one expected Ertz to be a top 10 tight end just because of his injury history, and he had a phenomenal season. The underachiever is Austin Eckler. Granted, Jaden Daniels with 148 carries and leading the team in rushing yards would relegate Eckler to number 3 status, but Eckler was also relatively underutilized in the passing game just as much as on the ground. Both rushing and receiving yards were his worst seasons since his rookie year. And my offseason riser is Ben Sinnott. Again, Zach Ertz turned 34 in November and is still more likely than not to be subject to injuries. Sinnott will get his opportunity. And I always love touting a player who had 5 receptions for 28 yards and only played 27% of the snaps. But again, we've been waiting for the Sinnott breakout with Ertz remaining healthy. That didn't happen. 2025, it will.
It will. It definitely will. I've offered as much as a second-round pick for Ben Sinnott in a couple of leagues, Dynasty leagues, and it got turned down. So people see that the writing's on the wall for Ben Sinnott to be the guy here, but it is what it is. Jeff, thanks for coming on this 2 hour and 24 show, 24-minute show, which we thought would be about an hour and 10 minutes. But you know what you're getting into when you come here. Sorry about that, partner. It is
Absolutely.
What it is.
Thank you for having me.
Thank God I don't pay you by the hour. I'd be under budget big time. But tell them what can they find you at? What's going on? What do you got going on in your life there, Jeff?
Well, first of all, you can find me on X at ffcommish_ys or on Blue Sky at ffcommish_ys.bsky.social. Again, just relishing in the off season, going through all my leagues, determining who's returning, who's not, making collections, paying out awards, and preparing for the winter meetings, which will take place in February. So that's kind of what I'm doing in the fantasy realm. And other than that, just waiting, enjoying this bye week for the Lions and waiting to head to Ford Field for the divisional round playoff.
I think Monday afternoon, maybe we'll do a commissioner show, Jeff. I think we were talking about possibly making that happen. So JT, if you feel like jumping on, if you're not, I got a lot of drinking to do this weekend. I don't know how my liver is going to be on Monday morning, but we'll see what happens. But just little commissioner show kind of thing. We'll figure that out. But JT, where can everybody find you at?
Yeah, find me on Twitter, the X at JT Orange. I'm already diving into off-season rookie profiles. I got one coming out on Tet McGlynn from Arizona on DLF. So jump over there. They've got all kinds of ones already started up. Looking at all the guys going here in the 2025 NFL draft. So I'll be doing a bunch of that stuff here in the off season. This is kind of where I start cranking up all my writing and everything else as the fantasy season's over and gambling season is coming to an end here with the end of college football and NFL. Got a couple weeks left here to get some good bets in. But that's kind of where you'll see all my stuff writing and all that on DLF. And then we'll be doing a bunch of stuff on the stew with JT Brew, which is mostly focused on gambling during the regular season. But in the off season, we do a bunch of mock drafts and kind of leading up to the NFL draft, talking about rookies and everything else there. So I'll be having a lot of that coming in the next couple of months.
You just copy and paste my Tet McGlynn article that I sent you last week?
Absolutely. What? Exactly what I did. It was exactly what I did.
I knew it. So, all right, John McGlynn 75 on X. I'm going to do a lot of off-season stuff too here. Where I'll talk a little bit about commissioner stuff and then jump right into rookie stuff. I'm going to jump on JT with some drafts, jump on fantasy and frames anywhere I possibly can with anybody I possibly can, and then we'll get to the off-season. This is definitely my favorite part of fantasy football. Setting lineups is disgusting for me. It gets by the end of the season, I almost don't want to do it anymore. The off season here, just get speculation, learning more stuff, taking notes about everybody. This is my favorite time of year by far. So I'll be around as much as I possibly can with whoever wants to hear whatever I have to say. So tune in anywhere on Fantasy and Frames, anywhere Dynasty Evaluation, JT stuff across the board. Jeff, thanks for coming on. JT, thanks for coming on. Sorry for all you guys who stuck for a 2 hour 27-minute show, but we love you. We're here for you, and there's more to come. Talk to you later.